You're watching Reddit Aliens, the weekly compilation. No relief, no breaks. Just story after story sinking deeper into the dark. If you're listening with headphones, good. If you're alone, better. Enjoy now and subscribe.
What was the creepiest thing you saw while visiting someone at their house? I went to visit a neighbor who had just moved into a bigger home. She had 11 children. I sat down at the kitchen counter as my neighbor was getting us tea. All of a sudden, the dishwasher slowly opens from the inside, and out crawled a kid. Couldn't have been more than 18 months old. Kid looks at me, then crawls away. I thought I was on camera being punked somehow, but my friend never saw it and never skipped a beat in whatever she was talking about. It was weird, and the kid was creepy. Had a sleepover at a friend's when I was around 12. The dad sat at the dinner table in only his tighty-whities and didn't say a single word. The entire family was clearly intimidated by him, as no one else said a single word for the entire meal either. I never slept over again. I was at a sleepover, and we were watching a movie in their shed, and since we were 10 it got scary, so we went back into the house, and we passed by this what we thought was a toy snake. It was humongous. Anyway, she brushes it off, saying it was probably her brother's, and we went inside. I mentioned it to her mom, saying it was so cool, and she was like, "What toy snake?" Turns out, it was a 2-meter snake that definitely was venomous. I'm Australian. In 2008, when I was like 18 or 19, I'd been drinking with 2 friends who wanted to walk to another friend's house down the street. A house I had never been to before, but it was someone I had known since kindergarten. I grew up in a really bad town. When we get to the house, the grass is freshly cut and clean, and the whole outside has a really well-maintained and clean-looking appearance. We walk in, and I'm pretty buzzed, but I notice there's a lot of trash, like in the corners where all the walls meet the floor, like all over, and down the hall we're walking down. I guess because I'd been drinking, I just kind of thought they were cleaning out junk as we were coming in. I figured my friend is living with another friend's family. We get to their room, and they're playing Super Nintendo. We're just talking and catching up, and they pull out this 5-foot bong they had been talking about. Thinking about it now, it had to be fucking disgusting, because what happened next was shit I will never forget. They kept talking about it, and wanted me to try it, so I do. I cleared it, and just stare at the screen, as they play Street Fighter, staring to space out. I ask where the restroom is, and as I'm standing there taking a piss, I'm finally alone for a moment and focus on where I am. I start to notice the walls, floors, and counters moving, and it had nothing to do with any crazy drug being put in the weed. The entire restroom is covered in garbage, and several hundreds to thousands of tiny roaches, along with huge ones. I'm in shock for a second, and just don't understand what the fuck is going on. I walk out, again thinking maybe some infestation, and that's why they're cleaning out trash. I've seen bad living conditions, but that kind of shit in my mind had to have some kind of reasonable explanation, because it was disgusting inside, and the house looked perfect outside. As I walk from the bathroom back to the room, I'm becoming more aware of the condition of this place. I go to the room, trying to find some comfort in being around the friends I showed up with, as I'm slowly starting to lose it. I sit back down on the edge of the mattress on the floor as they're all talking and playing Street Fighter like nothing is off, and then I notice the room I'd been sitting in this whole time is also fucking covered in roaches. They're climbing on the fucking walls, ceilings, on the carpet between us. One falls off the wall on one of my friends, and I start to have a panic attack. I tell them I gotta make a call. I walk outside and call to get a ride home, and just lay on the sidewalk feeling so gross and disgusted and confused and depressed. There was also a little kid crawling around in there, and the mom was walking around doing something. I just laid on the sidewalk outside until my mom showed up. I brought it up years later to my friend and was like, "That house you took me to is so fucking gross." And he just replies, "Oh, the crack house? I drank and I smoked weed, that was it." It looked like a normal fucking house, and I guess I was just hanging out in a crack den for an hour. It was so fucking upsetting. One time I was super stoned at my friend's mom's house. I went to the freezer to look for food. I found what appeared to be individually wrapped burritos in paper towels. I opened the Ziploc bag and unwrapped what I thought was a burrito. It was a frozen puppy. She had a bag of 6 frozen puppies in her freezer. Her dog had a stillbirth, and she didn't know what to do with them, so she froze them until she could figure it out. I was mortified. When I was really young, around 7 or 8, a family moved into the house next to ours. I didn't really realize that something was wrong with them because I was so young, but looking back, the son had some major issues. He was in his 40s and still living with his parents. He also had some really cool gadgets and new stuff my mother couldn't afford as a single mom, like a CD player, for example, and some gaming consoles, stuff you can easily impress a child with. So for me, he was just a cool neighbor who let me play with his stuff. So from one way to another, my mother didn't want me to meet him again, for seemingly no reason at all. And what happens when you tell a kid not to do something? They do it anyways. This was actually the first time I was on the first floor of their house, and his room still gives me nightmares till today. A room full of dolls, all different sizes. Some of them looked like he put makeup on their faces. Others had really short hair or no hair. I assumed he cut or shaved them. An overall creepy sight, even today. I felt really uneasy and left. I of course told my mother, and after she was done beating my ass for again going over there, she called the cops. They came and picked him up while also questioning me and what exactly I saw. He was basically gone after that day, and his parents moved away shortly after. Years later, my mother told me that he was convicted for possession and distribution of child porn and other weird stuff, and that she caught him more than once filming through the different windows of our house. I fix computers and go to people's houses from time to time to do so. One day, a guy who looked like a vampire answered the door. He had black curtains, red walls, a literal demon shrine with the pentagram, goat skull, incense and all. He was pasty white, whiter than me, and I'm a ginger, wearing a black silk suit and had dark circles. I walked in, looked around for about a minute as he showed me where his desk was, then pretended to get an emergency text and noped the fuck out of there. Not about to be your next sacrifice or hex, my dude. Weird lights and shadow people. In middle school, I had a friend I'd always visit on the weekends, and I was convinced his house and entire neighborhood were haunted. In fact, pretty much everyone in the city who knew anything about the neighborhood thought it was haunted. Lots of creepy stuff happened there, but off to the top of my head, there was one night both his parents left for a date. His older sister was in high school at the time, so she was barely ever home on the weekends. Anyway, we're in his den watching a movie, which has a clear view of the driveway outside. His family had 2 cars, and the sister didn't drive, so they still had 1 car in the driveway. In the middle of the movie, we see flashes of light outside, and we notice the car outside is turning itself on and off, just the lights. First the inside lights, then the outside for a little while, then only the inside again. It kept going on and off like that for a few minutes, and it wasn't making noise, so it didn't seem like an alarm issue. We both start to get creeped out, so we leave to go to a more secure room in the house. As we pass through the kitchen or dining room area, we both notice movement outside and see what looks like multiple silhouettes of people moving through the backyard. It was hard to tell how old they were or where or how many of them, but as soon as we saw it, we bolted to his room and locked the door. Could have been just teenagers fucking around, but something about how silent the whole thing was really off-putting. Lots of weird shit happened at his place. Wow, do I have a doozy. How I drew the short straw on being put up in a stranger's home for a night. Also, details are intentionally vague for anonymity and because of age and trauma. For a bit of context, when I was in high school, I for a while was in a group called Air Cadets. It was kind of like a military-themed Boy Scouts, where we were indoctrinated into a military lifestyle and learned all the usual bullshit. Uniforms, marching, authority, and specifically Air Force-related stuff like planes and whatnot. I wasn't really into all the military stuff so much, but it was cool because we got to go camping every month or so and also had training stuff at the RAAF base in the next city down. One year, they had some big national survival competition thing, the exact details are kinda fuzzy, where everyone from our wing, our state basically, had to fly to Sydney and then spend a week in the Blue Mountains hiking around and doing various objectives. In order to get to Sydney, we had to go to the next city over, stay the night at the home of one of our fellow cadets, and then fly the following morning. We were randomly assigned billets, which for my mates from my town were pretty good. I drew the short straw here by a whole heap. Once we'd arrived at the cadet place in the next city over, we were all briefed, paired off with those whose homes we were going to stay in, and then left to it. The kid with whom I was paired was a complete stranger to me. Coming from a different cadet squadron, I had never met nor even heard of him, but being all of 15 years old, I thought I was mature enough to handle all this. The first thing that happened after finding his father's parked car and putting my bag in the boot was me accidentally closing it a little too hard. His father greeted me by inviting me to slam the fucking door harder next time. Afterward, he was marginally friendlier. The house itself was typical, working-class, suburban, single-floor brick place that looked a bit neglected, but not overly so from the outside, and that musky, overcrowded smell from the inside. The lounge room was weird. It seemed that all this family did was record pay TV programs because an entire wall, like 4 meters long and 2.5 to 3 meters tall, was occupied by shelves that held videotapes. There must have been thousands of them. The bathroom was small and poorly lit and filled with too many shampoo bottles. The kitchen was cramped and the whole family just lived on the couch. The kids' bedroom, where I was to sleep to, was just packed with odd shit, toys and CDs and all sorts of strangely and adult-sized cribs. Think a baby's crib, but able to fit myself at 5'8" tall. Being the guest, I was content sleeping in this crib rather than a 15-year-old boy's bed for the night, but the father insisted we do a coin toss to make the decision. Apparently, this was the first coin toss the kid had ever done, and he fucked it up enough that his father shouted at him for a while. I ended up sleeping or staying in that cot for nearly 12 hours because I figured it was the one place I could just hide from these weirdos. We basically spent the whole evening watching TV, with me sitting on a chair bored and trying to minimize my suffering until it seemed a reasonable hour to go to bed. We just sat there watching pay TV reality shows. I remember we watched one about amateur robot battles, where the contestant had to build robots and make them fight, and when it was all over, the father rang one of his friends and excitedly told him all the details of the episode we just watched. Also, the mother hopped up from the couch to go somewhere, the toilet I guess, and the father sprung forth as she stepped in front of him and grabbed one of her tits in his mouth. Need I say she wore only some old-fashioned housewife dress with no bra underneath. I really hope she was wearing underpants. And after the father finished telling his friend about the TV show, he and his son went to the kitchen and shaved each other's heads into crew cuts, leaving the clippings on the floor until the mother came along later and swept the entire lot out the side door and onto the ground outside. And for dinner, we ate frozen meat pies. I kinda understand doing something cheap and easy when a guest comes, particularly if the guest is some unwanted stranger, but what really struck out is how excited they all were at the prospect of frozen meat pies, and not even top shelf brands like 4 and 20. These were just the Woolies knockoff and oven-cooked chips. Normally, frozen pies are just the kind of odd shit left in the freezer that you cook when you have an absolutely dearth of time and enthusiasm, but these bastards treated them like good fish or cuts of Scotch fillet. The whole evening was just weird. They struck me as a loving enough family, but just weird. Not really Manson family creepy, just strange. The kids seemed to me like one of the oddballs you'd see at school with no friends. The worst part was that none of their behavior struck me as really strange until I was telling my father the following week when I got home. Sorry about the sporadic writing. I'm dredging this story from the depths of my memory. Whenever I stay at my parents' house, the room I sleep in has this Womble pajama case thing that my mum has decided shall forever be stored at the foot of my bed, staring at me while I'm trying to sleep. This creepy thing has the cold, lifeless eyes of a serial killer, so I'm obviously not very comfortable sleeping with it looking at me, and so I point it somewhere else when I go to bed. The problem is, my mom seems to spend her free time patrolling the house looking for things to clean and tidy, and when she sees the Womble in a different spot, she puts it back, so that when I get back to bed, get comfortable and ready to settle down, I'm disturbed to find that creepy piece of shit goddamn looking at me again. No matter how much I beg, she never seems to take it on board with every time I ask, with it basically being a new conversation every time. The problem is, she decided where its place is, and she usually says something like, "Where should it go instead?" And I'll suggest the bin, the fireplace, the gates of hell from whence it came, or at the very least just not looking at me while I sleep. But no, she is a compulsive cleaner and can't stand it not being in its designated place, and keeps putting it back. I once even suggested she put it in her room, to which she said, "No, it's really creepy." Well, get fucking rid of it then. It's not even the creepiest toy they own, it's just the one I can't escape. They have this Mickey Mouse doll that's tattered enough that its smile makes it look like it's just thoroughly enjoyed dismembering another toy. At least that abomination isn't visible from my bed, but it is also stored in my room. Not creepy, but bizarre and unsettling. I used to know somebody who had their ex-boyfriend living in the attic above her bedroom. He used to live with her and her parents when they were a couple, but when they split up, he just moved into her attic. Everything was okay with it, apparently. However, they both had real trouble trying to have further relationships with others because girlfriends were not comfortable sleeping in the attic above his ex, and boyfriends didn't like her ex sleeping above them. There were several spare rooms in the house. It was massive, so there was no real reason why he had to live in the attic. Not creepy exactly, but definitely gross. Had a sleepover with a classmate in college for a project that was due soon. It was a small house and his entire extended family lived in it, typical for our country and culture. Come nighttime, I went to their restroom and walked past this drywall dividing their bedroom and the living room where we were working at. There was a small hole. Some light shone in, and there were dozens of fucking rats living in it like a goddamn farm. The family seems to be aware they're living with them. As the noises of the day died down, their little squeaks eventually filled the silence of the living room. I woke several times during the night with the rats nibbling at my toes. This is probably only creepy to me because I didn't grow up in the suburbs, but back in high school I was visiting a friend's house for the first time and got the strangest sense of deja vu. As she showed me around, it slowly dawned on me that the house's floor plan was exactly the same as the home of a different friend I had in middle school. The interior design was basically identical too, the same neutral beige walls and neutral beige furniture. The only difference was the people in the pictures hanging on the walls. These houses weren't even in the same subdivision or the same part of town. I think it was probably just the same developer who built them. Probably not the kind of story OP is looking for, but as a kid with artsy parents who were constantly redecorating with fun estate sale furniture and painting all the rooms in our house different colors, it really freaked me out. What is your cryptid, ghost, or paranormal story? RA ghost in college. We were told there was a ghost of an RA who died in our building. We had one drinking fountain for our floor in the middle. I wake up and go to get a drink at around 2:30 to 3 a.m. I hear the door to the stairwell around the corner opened and close. I hear what sounded like someone walking my way wearing athletic sport pants. You know, they kind of make a noise when you walk. There's no one, yet the sound walks past me and out toward the double doors that move the tiniest bit when the sound gets there. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, and I know I wasn't asleep. Yet for some reason I was like, must have been the ghost RA checking all was well. I was way too calm about it. Not really scary looking back, but when I was 11, my parents had left me home alone for a few hours and my brother was at a sleepover. I heard footsteps near me, called my mom, she called the neighbor to check on me. No one was in the house apparently. I was still scared though, so I stayed outside alone for 3 hours while my parents were still out. It rained most of the 3 hours and it was mid-autumn, so it was cold rain. When I was 6 or 7, I saw an older woman in a nightgown at the top of the stairs. I said the gray lady as a way to describe her when telling my parents about her, and my dad flipped out. Apparently, he had also seen this apparition and called her the same name, but had only mentioned it to my mom once my brother and I were asleep. My dad and I are the only ones who see her, but it went on for over 2.5 decades until they sold the house. She was always nice to me, just would stare at me, but she used to watch my dad from their bedroom door and rush at him screaming during the night. They started sleeping with the door shut. I've also seen my childhood dog many times in our house before my parents sold it. My time to shine, cracks knuckles. My first ever was when I was 5 and I went outside alone while my mom was taking a nap when I wasn't supposed to. 2 kids about my age came over to my yard and started talking to me, and we played, and when I turned around they had disappeared. I casually asked my mom about the kids next door, and she said there weren't any kids next door. But of course, I couldn't say anything or I'd blow my cover that I went outside when I wasn't supposed to. Cut to nearly 20 years later, and I found out those 2 kids I played with were the ghosts of 2 kids that had died next door. I was Googling our old houses and stumbled across the article about them dying in a house fire next door a few years prior to us living there. It was really sad. I only knew it was them because the picture of them was attached to the article and I would have recognized their faces anywhere. When I got older and moved out on my own, I lived in a house I shared with 2 other roommates. My roommates worked nights, so I was always home alone. Well, weird, typical paranormal stuff started happening, like my door would slam shut and open on its own, lights would flicker, the bathroom drawers would slowly open and slam shut, etc. Well, I just tried to ignore it, and my new boyfriend came over. We had been dating for a few months, and I joked that my place was haunted a few times, but he was a skeptic. I finally agreed to let him come over, and he was sitting on my bed while I was organizing some laundry on the closet floor. I noticed the door to my room start to creak, and I whispered at him, "Look," and pointed to it. We watched the door as it slowly moved, and then it stopped completely, then slammed shut. I just looked over at him and said, "See, I told you." Then he was white as a ghost. He had a roommate moving out of his place at the time and asked me to move in because my place was obviously creepy, and so that's how we moved in together, lol. A year later, we brought that whole situation up, and he told me that when the door had started creaking, a black fog came out from the top of my closet and was closing in on me, but looked over at him and saw him on the bed and flew out of the room, and that's when the door slammed shut. Super creepy experience, but now we're married, so it's a fun story to tell. I also had this one really weird out-of-body experience once where we lived in this old shitty cabin and I was asleep. I woke up hovering over my sleeping body, and I looked over to the side of my bed where the closet was, and an old creepy man hobbled out and was screaming, "Get out!" at my sleeping body. Floating, me shut my eyes quickly, and sleeping me sat up straight in bed in a panic. I never quite figured out what that whole thing was, but I started sleeping with the closet door shut. I'll keep them shorter, so this isn't any longer than it already is, but another house we lived in had multiple ghosts, a little girl, a woman, and some sort of demonic and evil entity that lurked in the basement. The little girl was seen by the house renovators floating up the stairs and gliding through the wall. They were so scared they left all of their equipment and supplies and never came back, and sent an email they wouldn't come back until the house was blessed. One evening, my boyfriend was leaving for his night shift and called me, asking me why I was in the spare room watching him through the window in the dark. I was like, I'm not freaking me out. I'm in our room, and walked to the window and waved as I watched the color drain from his body and him fly into the house. He had told me a very clear visual of a woman was standing in the window watching him leave the driveway. I slept well that night. My breaking point in that house was the night I got home from a late shift. Starving, I went straight to the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal, and it's dead silent in the house, and a woman's groaning voice booms from the hallway and does this whisper yell of my name, threw the cereal bowl and flew upstairs to our bedroom and didn't leave until morning. The dog also was always staring off into the walls with his hair raised, and we always heard footsteps stomping around in the middle of the night. In college, I worked at a pizza place. I worked mornings alone for about a year, only person in the store. I felt the presence of a male spirit who liked to watch me work. He gradually got closer as weeks went by, and I had to tell him to stay back. He complied, and I never felt threatened. One night during a busy rush, I saw him in the back of the crowded restaurant. He was an old man wearing jeans and a button-up denim shirt, invisible from the knees down. He looked super surprised I spotted him, lol. Lots of other stuff at that same pizza place. Noises in the dining room like a crowded party before opening. Go to check it out and noise stops. Sound of metal pans falling but no pans on the floor. A waitress refused to clean the bathrooms without an escort because she saw the ghost of a boy in one of them. I was not the only one who experienced things, but they didn't like to talk about it much. It never bothered me though. The ghosts there weren't bad like other places I've been. My bedroom has 2 light switches on either side. Next to each light switch is a door. I was in the center of the room playing cards with my younger brother. We were just kids fooling around. In the other room, our parents were arguing about something. Suddenly, I saw a hand turn the light switch off and the room went dark. It was 100% the light switch on my right. I saw it. Then I heard a huge bang, and my cousin's doll fell from the cupboard. It was a doll that would, incredibly creepy looking, and never been opened, because my cousin thought it was scary. Well, I calmly got up and turned the light back on. I thought someone was playing a joke on me. I then asked my parents if they turned the light on. They said no, and quickly went into a heated debate. So it must have been my other brother? Nope, he was on the other side of the house watching the TV downstairs. The thing that got me, that I think about a lot, was the hand was not brown like my family's. It was an off-white. I only saw it for a few seconds. My cousin remembers the event exactly the same as I do. Most likely it was my parents arguing and maybe knocked the wall that caused the doll to fall, or the light switch off. Maybe the doll was upset that we were playing right there and she has never been opened in years. Either way, I'm glad I'm out of that house. I have hours of fucked up stories. Maybe I was just a crazy kid, but when I was 6, my cousin and I were playing house. We were both mommies and each of us had a doll as a daughter. My cousin went to the bathroom and my doll decided to turn her eye in my direction. I ran off crying, trying to tell my cousin what happened, but when we got back there, its eyes were back to normal, and I tried to throw that horrendous doll away many times, but it kept coming back. Every time I threw it away, I didn't warn my parents because I knew they were going to bring it back. I was able to finally get rid of that thing when I was 17 years old. Help me God. This was 2016 in New Hampshire. I was 25. I was lying in a bed staring at the wall about 10 o'clock at night. The wall began swirling clockwise like a portal. 2 figures came through. They looked to be made of glass, iridescent, clear, and the surface of the figures had the appearance of running water. They were about 6 feet tall each. Instinctively, I got up and grabbed a legal pad next to my bed and a pen. I began drawing strange geometric shapes with precision. They looked like mandalas, and the lines were perfectly straight and circular, like they had been made with a protractor. After that, one of the 2 figures approached me, and I heard a voice in my head telling me not to be afraid. It put its hand on my shoulder, and the next thing I knew, it was 7 in the morning and the sun was up. I would have thought it was a dream, except the mandalas were still there. I've never been much of an artist, so the fact that the circles were perfectly round and the lines perfectly straight made it seem like the beings were acting through me. My mom refuses to go to the basement because she thinks it's haunted either by someone or by wolves, as she calls it. So I have to go do the laundry every time. I've had a few weird things happen, like a shadow moving at the corner of my eye, or even when I thought I saw a face in the dark. The worst was a few weeks ago when I was going to grab a wine bottle from the cellar, even deeper in the basement, and I hear something walking next to me in the dark. Not human footsteps like a dog walking, because I could clearly hear the claws making high-pitched sound against the ground. It really sounded like a dog was walking towards me. I bolted out, and it hasn't happened again. Yet. My sister, mother, and I went for a walk in a part of rural northern California with deep oak forests. Most of these forests are quite young, only 150 or so years old, as most of the trees were cut down for the lumber during the gold rush of 1849. Every now and then, as on our road, there were beautiful 200-year-old oaks with thick, spidering branches and moss growing in the bark. We were walking beneath one in the gloom of dusk, trees in silhouette against an ink-dark sky. Suddenly, these things came hopping out of the manzanita bushes ahead. There were 8 of them, ankle-high, rounded like gravestones, bopping along low in the undergrowth. Each one had 2 huge eyes, taking up the whole head. We all froze as things filtered up into the road. My mother turned on her keychain flashlight. We were face to face with 8 fluffy owlets. I was sleeping in bed, oversleeping in fact, at least I thought I was. I remember my stepfather trying to wake me up and me just crawling under the covers. I was suspicious of why it was dark, but I was still half asleep and didn't care. Suddenly, he grabs my leg and pulls me out of bed, but I still cling to the covers. I was just that sleepy. I feel him drag me across the wood floor, out of my room and into the kitchen. Suddenly I realize after waking up slightly more that this makes no sense, and also that he has not actually said a word to me, and I don't know for sure if even it is my stepfather. I dart awake and kick my foot. Whatever was grabbing lets go, and I sit up in the dark kitchen with nobody around me. I just went back to bed, but I took my gun out of the dresser and put it under my pillow. I was completely calm and didn't feel an ounce of fear until I woke up the next morning and processed what had just happened. I once jumped in time, or the world jumped in time without anyone noticing. Anyway, the metro train has gone from one metro station to another that is 5 stations away. It would take 10 minutes usually, in 3 minutes, and I do not remember it passing through the stations that are between these 2. I could have explained this by accidentally falling asleep for a few minutes, but since I was in a hurry and kept a tight track of time, I noticed it easily. There's also a message I remember sending on station 1. It was received immediately. My friend even answered me right after, so I read the answer while still staying on the station, and when I got outside, the time was exactly the time sent, plus 3 minutes. I was 9. Jack and Jill bathroom connects to my room and my sister's. I would leave both doors open because I would get scared. I could see clear into my sister's room. I woke up and there was a much smaller girl than my older sister and I, maybe 5, in the bathroom staring in my room. I could only see the silhouette. She let out a slight giggle and walked into the tub or toilet room. I stared at that hallway of a bathroom until the sun came up. No one ever came out. Had my sister check it before I went back in. Always creeped out. I shut those doors after. Not mine, but a friend. Basically, he was in his room when he looked outside and saw a pale-faced thing in full black outside his window. He got up and went to open the side door to his house, and the thing was over there. It walked to the door and looked into his hallway through the door window, so he couldn't move until it went away. I don't know if he told his parents, but when he told me, I got straight scared shitless. It's a little long, but hang with me. My dad was cleaning out our camper getting ready for a trip when someone came driving down the road looking at our house. The lady asked my dad if he lived in the house, to which he replied yes. She goes on to say that she's in town from out of state for a class reunion and wanted to come see if this house was still here. The lady goes on to ask my dad if he knows what happened. Confused, he said no, as she explains, there was a family that lived in the house in the late 60s that was a classmate of hers. There was a mom, dad, and daughter. The dad worked overnight at the local refinery. While he was at work, the mom had a mental break. She took the family shotgun and killed their daughter. Overtaken with grief, the mom killed herself. The dad came home after work to find it all for himself. Shocked, my dad went to the local library to see if he could find some truth, and sure enough, it was all true. The mom had a history of mental issues, but was very active in the church and local clubs. The daughter was graduating the following year. The dad died a few weeks later of natural causes. My parents kept this from me until recently, since they thought it would scare my sister and I. My dad was renovating an old storage room in our house one day. He was the only one home as my sister and I were at school and my mom worked. He was taking an old corkboard down off the wall when he said it felt like someone was right behind him watching him. As he took the board down, he heard something hit the ground. It was the dog tags of the dad whose family died in the house. My dad thinks it was the man, and that he wanted him to find the tags. Spooks me out, as this happened in my now bedroom. We have more stories of the house, as such horrid deaths have happened. What was the most terrifying thing you've experienced while home alone, not safe for work? Sleeping one night, I wake up to footsteps upstairs in my house. Noisy, not sneaky at all footsteps. Door was usually locked, but figured I just happened to forget that night and someone decided to let themselves in. I knew I had a bat between myself and where the invader was, so I quietly made my way to get it in the dark, decided darkness in my own home was an advantage, and then positioned myself where I could get a full swing without exposing myself, and then I waited. Footsteps are coming my way now, so I'm tensed up and ready to defend myself. Legit, get to the point of being wound up, ready to swing, when I hear the words, "Wake up, you little prick, I just drove 4 hours to see ya." If I hadn't recognized my uncle's voice in that last second, I would have beat him like I was fighting for my life. Turns out my uncle got into some beers and decided it was a good idea to show up at my house unannounced at 2 a.m. We still laugh about it. He still gets to drinking and has horrible ideas. Haha. We lived in this house when I was growing up that had been built in the 1750s. It was being restored by my stepdad at the time, but my mom got sick and he took her to Texas for treatment. I was still in school, and so I stayed and tried to take care of the house. I got used to being there alone, but it was creaky and dark, and the stone walls made odd shapes in the flashlight beams. Cool as the old place was, when it was empty or just had one lonely kid wandering around it, it could be a little unsettling. Also, imagine you're 16, living alone in a big old, really old house. You'd get the spooks now and then too. Yes, you would. Of course, my older stepbrother has said that the house was haunted, and they'd tried to scare me plenty too. So that stuff, whether I believe it or not, was still in the back of my head, you know? So, this one time, I was staying with some friends for a long weekend, and I got back late, and I don't think that I'd slept much the whole time I was gone, and we had school the next day, so I just sort of collapsed on my bed and went right to sleep. In the middle of the night, there was a bad storm, and it woke me and the power was out, and of course, it was pitch black in the old place, except for the flash of lightning. This was out in the country too, so there weren't streetlights or anything like that. I was pretty shook up and I was still groggy because of how tired I was, so I rolled over on my back, thinking that I was going to look for my flashlight. I have to add here that this was in the early 90s, so there was no mobile phones, at least for our family, and no internet or anything. We did have a phone, like a house phone, but that was downstairs. Help was a long way off in those days, too. Anyway, I roll over onto my back in order to look for my flashlight, as I said, and this hand, this limp and cold and sort of clammy hand, just plops onto my face, right onto my face. I nearly shit the bed. I'll just say that right now and admit it up front. Scared me nearly to death. I thought this was the end. It was the most terrifyingly horrible thing that ever happened to me until that point. This coldish, clammy hand is on my face, and I know it's a hand, and I know that it isn't mine. Whose hand is it? That is the key question. As I'm lying there, heart smashing against my ribs, I realize that this hand isn't doing anything at all to me. It's just laying there. It isn't scratching in my eyes or tearing chunks of skin off. This hand isn't seeking to cut the precious air supply from my lungs. I start to calm down a tiny bit when it occurs to me that this hand might belong to a dead person in my bed. Ugh. I go to reach for the hand and get it off. I don't know why this took me so long to think of, and it moves off of my face by itself. Wait, what? Is the person alive? Partly dead? What is happening to me? Suddenly, my own hand is in agony of pins and needles, just throbbing and tingling and really hurting, and then it dawns on me what just happened. In the middle of the night, during a bad storm, and in the midst of a power outage, I rolled over to find my flashlight, and my own hand, yes, you read that right, it was my own hand, flops onto my own face and nearly scares me to death. As I said, I nearly shit the bed. I can still remember all of this with pristine clarity. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me at home and alone, and I've told this story 1,000 times, but it never gets old to me. If I had a weak heart, or if I kept a gun under my pillow, imagine the story then. 3 a.m. I was dead ass asleep. Missy, the terrier mutt, woke me up with the "I'm gonna kill you" bark. Her and both the cats were staring at the back window of my studio apartment, hackles raised. The cats were growling. Missy wouldn't stop barking. I turned on the light. I tried to look out the window, but one of the cats, Billy the black cat, who had way more than 9 lives, smacked my hand. Missy kept barking for another minute or so while I washed the Billy scratches off. She was too old to retract her claws, so that slap drew blood. Eventually, whoever or whatever got the animals all worked up left, so I went back to bed. The cats and dog hopped up on the bed with me and stared out the window. They were still staring when I woke up. 3 years ago, I was chilling at home with my dog just watching some Game of Thrones. At around 1 a.m., he randomly wakes up, jumps onto my bed and starts growling at my open door. It was just an empty, dark corridor. This was the second time he's randomly woken up and growled at an empty room or hallway. But, being the lazy and apathetic person that I am, I just accepted my death at the hands of this ghost and went back to watching Game of Thrones. I did not die. My dog did the random growling one more time and then never did it ever again. Nothing has ever happened to me while I was home alone, but several things have happened to me while I was alone. Like people were home, but they were either asleep or in their rooms. Once I was playing video games around 2 a.m. and during a loading screen, I looked out the front window and someone was standing in front of my house on the sidewalk. People across the street are always throwing parties, so I assumed it was one of their peoples. A couple minutes later, I look back and they are standing in my front lawn. They aren't even looking into my house. They have their back turned, but they are in my front yard. I have a fence and a gate. That makes a loud noise when opened. I didn't hear it at all. My front door was open because it was hot, but my screen door was closed. I slowly crept over to it and very quietly locked it. When I went back to the front window, they were now standing in the walkway that leads to my door. Their back still turned to me. They moved like 15 feet in a matter of seconds without making any noise. I just stared for like 20 minutes and they didn't move once. Eventually, they just walked off, opened my gate, and closed it without ever turning around and walked off down the street. Still no idea what the fuck that was about. I once ate a boiled potato, but swallowed a chunk of it whole by accident. It got lodged into my windpipe and I was choking. I remember standing up and panicking because you physically can't make any noises or anything when this happens to you. I genuinely thought that this was going to be the death of me. Luckily, I volunteered to do a first aid course with my work 2 weeks before this happened. I remember abdominal thrusting was the best way to unblock the windpipe. so I got both my hands together and thrusted them into my abdomen as hard as I could. Thankfully it worked, and the potato came flying out. I was probably 9 or 10 and was left at home for a few hours because I was being a brat and refused to go somewhere with my mom and sister. I was sitting in the kitchen eating. All of a sudden, the neighborhood's vicious dog slammed into our back door by the kitchen and then started trying to claw its way in through the doggy door. Like this dog was freaking the fuck out, and made it halfway in, but thankfully he was too fat to get further. He scooted out, and I heard him running around the house barking and scratching at the doors. I pulled the landline into the pantry and called my dad at work, crying about it, LMAO. He was like, "That short dog with the one ear and a limp? Just kick him or something, I don't know." He stayed on the phone with me and talked me up into coming out and locking the doggy door. After that was done, he was trying to calm me down, and I happened to turn around and holy shit, that was a big-ass possum under the dining room table. Basically, Cujo chased this thing into our house, and I didn't notice it running in first since I was face deep in pizza bagels. I screamed and accidentally hung up on my dad and went back into the pantry for a while. Then I realized that I actually wasn't scared of possums and came back out. He was gone. I just stayed in my room until my mom got back and eventually told her what happened, which pissed her off because now a fugitive possum was somewhere in the house, probably watching her while she got changed, her exact argument, and I didn't warn her. She made us sit in the car in the driveway with the front door open until my dad got home. Uneventful ending. Possum was found in the den behind the couch and shooed outside with a mop and a shovel. The hound of the Bakersfield continued to terrorize the neighborhood for another year or two, this before getting too fat and crippled. He had a fondness for chasing cars too closely. Was home alone when I was 11. The phone rang and a weird, slow voice said, "You know that you're all alone." You know in movies where someone scared in the room and hallway appears to stretch out? It did that to me as my stomach fucking dropped. I booked it over to my neighbor's house, bawling, and frantically called my mom a few times. She answered and said, "That was Grandma, you dumbass." My grandma laughed about it all week. Growing up, my family rented a house on the corner of two major intersections in Toronto. Next door to us was a convenience store and a sports bar. Every once in a while, some genius would owe money and would tell whoever owed that they lived next door. One day, my sister and I get home. I was 10 and my sister was 12 around the first time it happened. My sister was in her room. I was watching Bugs Bunny when all of a sudden, the front and back door were getting slammed so hard by like 6 guys, all of them yelling for us to open the door, that we were going to die and they were going to rob us. I was crying and my sister called my mom at work. They left after like 20 minutes, but I've never been so frightened in my life. 15-year-old me, home alone. I decide to watch Bride of Chucky. Yes, I'm old. Yes, I got it from Blockbuster Video Store. The whole movie. I'm just, this ain't scary. How stupid. Blah, blah, blah. Movie ends, I turn it off, and everything is too quiet, too calm. So, naturally, I go around checking doors are locked and start looking in closets. I check my closet, close it, and I hear a thump and a long of something sliding across wood. Noped the fuck out of the house and waited on the front lawn for a few hours until the adults came home. Turns out, it wasn't a homicidal doll jumping down and sliding across the floor toward me. When I had closed my closet door, a box fell off the top. Since the clothes were so tightly compressed in there, it slowly slid between the clothes and the door, making the sound. I didn't live that down for a long time. I was smoking weed, playing music, and cleaning the house. Out of nowhere, there was a pounding on my door. Then again, I figured maybe my music was too loud, so I turned it down. Nope. The pounding kept going. I looked through the peephole and see a lady I've never seen before just standing there. There's only 5 units in my building, so I would have recognized her if she had been there before. But she won't stop pounding on my door. Fuck, I'm too high for that shit. But I slowly open the door. She just fucking stares at me. She looks like she knows how to shank someone, and I'm not sure if she's on drugs or not. She stands there, wavering. I asked her what she wants, and she asked me if John's here. I tell her no, there's no John here, and I don't know a John. But I think the guy down the hall might be named John, and she should go check there. I slowly start to close the door, and she rams her shoe in before I can and won't move it. That's when we start struggling back and forth. She's trying to get in. I'm trying to kick her shoe out of the way and am pushing back at her. This goes on for a good while, and I'm eventually like, "What are you doing?" She kind of stopped and looks at me. I talk again. I'm trying to close the door. Move. Oh, sorry. And she slinks her foot back and walks down the hall. I chain and double lock that fucker up real quick. I was a teenager and my parents were out of state. One night at 3 or 4 a.m., I heard my dog start barking wildly and just in general freaking out. She's spinning in circles and whining and barking up a storm. I go outside with her into the darkness with my phone light and can't see much. She runs down toward the lake behind our house and I hear a big splash. I think it was her jumping in, but she's still barking and snarling. I call her and run toward her, afraid she's tangling with some wild animal. I finally find her and take her by the collar and drag her inside through the darkness and fog of night. I had flashed my light out toward the noise, but could never see much, probably not more than 2 feet in front of me with how thick the fog was. I get her inside and check her for any injuries, but find nothing. She continued to freak out for the next half hour or so, just spinning in circles and growling. It was really weird and creepy at the time, even though I'm sure it was just some large animal she somehow had heard from inside. I've never seen her act like that before or again, though before she passed. When I was a kid, my parents owned a business, and they had to let go of this one employee because she was using her money to buy drugs. It was clear as day that she was a drug addict, so they cut her loose and didn't fund her addiction. She came by several times, making excuses, saying she was going to get cleaned up, but they didn't believe her. After that, her boyfriend would often show up at our house with a shotgun and threaten my parents, said he would kill all of us and such. My parents would sleep with one eye shut and always warned us to let them know if we saw anyone outside our window at night. For those interested, it ended when he pulled up in our driveway one afternoon and my dad went out there with a shotgun in his face and told the guy off. We never saw the guy again after that confrontation. I was alone one foggy night and remembered I'd forgotten something in the trunk of my car, went outside to pick it up, and as I'm leaning in, I get a jolt of pure terror rolling along my spine and feel all the hair standing. I just know there's something standing behind me. I slowly turn around, not to scare it, and there it is. In the middle of the only light in the street, a big black mass is looking at me. Just thinking about it, I feel the pure cold terror I felt at that moment. It was foggy, so I couldn't make out what it was. I was completely frozen, trying to figure if I was going to go in flight or fight mode. Then it started to move toward me. I rapidly grabbed the car jack in my trunk, ready to throw it as I slowly backed toward my car door. It's too close for me to run to my house. As I'm jumbling with my key, it moves faster towards me. The only thing that stopped me from attacking it was to jump in its step. I recognized that happy walking of my neighbor's dog. I felt my heart sink. It was a big dog, and I lived near a wooded area, so of course, my brain, terrorized by that dark, foggy night, was sure it was a wolf. That dog got a big petting for successfully giving me such a cold sweat, and I made sure to return it to its home since it had escaped from their yard. I was about 10 or so, and living on a farm home alone. The nearest neighbor was a quarter of a mile away or so. A guy pulled into the driveway and walked up to the back door. I had my dog with me, golden retriever going nuts, and a loaded shotgun behind the door. We always had at least a loaded shotgun laying around behind the fridge. The guy said he was a friend of my dad's and wanted to come in. I told him no, that he could come back when my dad was around. He tried saying he was going to wait inside for my dad and began prying the door open. I let the dog go and grabbed the shotgun, stepped back and aimed it center mass, just like Dad taught me. The guy instantly backed away, swatted at the dog, got in his car as fast as possible, and took off. I can still remember him trying to pry his way into the door with a look on his face that was just determined, cold, and dead. I'll never forget that face. I live in New Zealand. This occurred during the second COVID lockdown around early March. Both of my parents are essential workers, which left me alone with my 2 dogs and my cat for my online classes. We had just gotten onto a health class when my phone goes off. I was nervous reaching for it already, as I always have my phone on mute. It doesn't make a sound and doesn't vibrate. Turns out it was our tsunami warning going off. In the early hours of March 5th, 2021, an 8.1 magnitude earthquake hit the Kermadec Islands. After clarification, turns out my house was too inland to be affected by the waves, so thankfully I didn't have to worry. But in that space of 5 to 10 minutes of me figuring out if I should run or not is terrifying. Serious. Urban explorers of Reddit, what is the scariest thing you have seen whilst exploring? I live in an old mining village. Back in the day, it was one of the biggest suppliers of coal, and from what I'm told, there's a labyrinth of tunnels under and around the village. When I was young, around 9 or 10 years old, myself and my cousins used to go to the mountains on adventures. We were walking through forest, and my cousin spotted what looked like a cave. We've taken this route hundreds of times and never noticed it before. We walk up to it out of curiosity, and it was this huge opening in the ground that was on a slight hill. The tree roots were all exposed, and there was a visible tunnel. It smelled damp, and there was a cold air coming out of it. Myself and my cousins stood close to the edge looking in. I know, not very smart. We instantly started saying it was one of the mine shafts, and my cousin started saying hundreds of men died in the mines and they're probably haunted. His brother told him to shut up, and my cousin quickly reminded us that our great-grandfather died in a mining accident when my grandmother was 3. We all knew this was true. We all just looked into the hole and backed up a little bit. Then all of a sudden, there was this howl that came out of the tunnel. We didn't hesitate and all bolted away instantly. We all ran back down the mountain and back to my auntie and told her about the tunnel and that we all heard a ghost, all of us visibly terrified. After going back and forth and my auntie telling us it was our imagination, my auntie finally said fine, and she had us take her back up the mountain and show her where it was. My auntie was shocked to see we were all telling the truth and there was a tunnel. We went back home and she called the coal board, and within days they came and filled it in. Turns out it was an old entrance to a dead-end tunnel, and the ground had collapsed when a storm a week prior to us finding it. That howl was by far one of the scariest things I ever experienced. Looking back, it was probably just the wind. Went to find an abandoned hospital, but it had been recently demolished. Some friends and I were exploring the demolition site, came in from the back by walking through woodlands, and were playing around on it, jumping into and climbing out of pits, walking on towers of rubble. We pulled ourselves under the entrance gate to get out, and some dog walker began yelling at us for being in there, mainly because they had pointed to a massive sign on the entrance gate saying something like, "Warning, asbestos, no entry." So we'd basically been rolling around in asbestos rubble for the last hour or so. When I lived in Detroit for a summer, it was urban exploring paradise. Scrap metal thieves were not fun, but not too scary. I just gave them space and tried not to be near them. The homeless guy who started stalking me around the old Packard plant was disturbing though. When I realized he wasn't just there, but was actively following me around between the buildings, I got the fuck out ASAP. I went to my old elementary school that was being torn down at about 11 p.m. and saw a little blonde girl in a white dress swinging on the swing set, maybe 6 or 7 years old and just by herself like she didn't have a care in the world. Me and my friend walked around inside the building remains, and a few minutes later, when we came out, she was gone. It's not unexplainable, she could have lived close by or something, but it definitely freaked us out at the time. This isn't an urban exploration story, but this reminded me of something. When I was small, like 8 or 9 maybe, my parents and I were hiking in a hilly forested area, wet and green, but it had some local farms and fields near areas. I remember us coming upon a green pasture clearing thing, and it was full of dead cows. I remember there being dozens all spread out as if they were killed where they stood. Also, there were no people or anything anywhere, just silence. I remember blood and some being kind of maimed, but it's fuzzy. I need to ask my parents if they remember. It makes me think about the chupacabra and shit. Wasn't really scary, but definitely a WTF moment. Somewhere in eastern North Carolina was some abandoned diner right off the highway. Went in and checked it out. Doors and glass were busted, so entry was easy. Found a ladder to the roof, so went on up. Up there was a spot where clearly someone had a fire, and naked Barbie looking like she was finger blasting herself with her head turned around backwards in front of a pentagram. Probably not the type of scare you're looking for, but while I was exploring some underground tunnels with friends, I was preparing to come up from a manhole when I noticed a cop car sitting in a nearby parking lot outside. Not long after, I noticed the cop patrolling a nearby light rail station on foot, and we all ducked down and crawled deeper into the tunnel. A few seconds later, we saw a flashlight shining into the tunnel and some radio chatter before the manhole cover was closed. We were frozen for a long time before we got up the courage to move on back to the exit we had come in from. We were terrified that they were going to try sending dogs in or something like that. There was an abandoned drive-in theater in our town when I was in high school. Being the sweet summer children we were, my boyfriend, now husband, and I wanted to explore the projector building. Someone was clearly squatting there. Lots of garbage and a nasty mattress were laying out. Fortunately, no one was there at the time. We ran out as fast as we could. Not a week later, a body was found there. I don't know what the story of the body was, but it freaked me out a bit. While I was in Germany, I passed an alley and I saw a guy dead on the floor. He had practically no head, and you could see a flipped-over car right next to the alley. I could hear sirens, cop sirens, but I didn't know why. I knew why afterwards. He had a completely open head with a ripped-off, practically dismembered arm, and then a huge cut along his stomach with both of his legs broken, or at least I thought his legs were broken because both of them were folded. Scariest shit I've ever seen. Was moving through a complex, and most of the surrounding area had been converted into cattle fields. Had to go through one of the fields to reach my destination. Doing so spooked the cows, and they all started moving at once. Was scared I was going to get trampled in a stampede. On mobile, so sorry. A former friend and I went to what we believed was an old abandoned military hospital in South Carolina. Not like on a base, but I think near the area. There were tags sprayed all over it, torn down walls, and we think we saw pieces of a stripped escalator. We got up to about the 3rd floor when we thought we heard something. After going through a few rooms, we heard it again, and I pointed to a shadow of a man who was probably twice our size. We both sneaked away as quietly as we could, screaming in our heads. Once we got to the 1st floor, we bolted out praying he wasn't coming after us. Thank God he didn't. Haven't been back there since, but still had fun doing it. It was really cool. 7 out of 10. Might do again. Was in an abandoned Catholic boarding school in rural North-South Wales. This would have been the late 90s. Was middle of the day, and I was on my own, slowly making my way through the 4 buildings on site. 2 were used as schoolhouses. 1 was the main dorm house, 3 stories high, and the 4th was fire gutted, so I have no idea what it was originally used for. Anyway, I was in the dorm house on the ground floor in the old kitchen. There was a massive Aga stove against one wall that I would have loved to cook on. At the back of the room, there was a closed door, and when I opened it, I got a huge rush of vertigo that really spun me out, and I had to steady myself on the frame beyond the door. It was so pitch black that I could see absolutely nothing beyond the frame. I had the feeling I was standing on a great precipice, and when I put my foot forward, there was no floor to be found. My brain was screaming to close the door and leave, but there was an ungodly force almost coaxing me to go in. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes trying to break away, and when I did, I absolutely legged it out of there. When I got outside, I found it was the middle of the night and freezing cold. Those 20 minutes were more like 12 hours. I have no idea WTF happened there that day or WTF was in that room, but it scares the absolute cunt out of me. Me and my friends were going in a sewer that was like 3 miles long. We find some cave crickets, then there's a giant room where all the graffiti stops. There was just bottles and it was super dark in there, so that scared us a little. I was on my way to an escape room near where I lived, but the only way to get there was to go through a few alleyways. So I'm walking down, and then in the corner of my eye, see there's paint on the wall. I turn around to see the paint, and the picture looked exactly like me. I was scared shitless, and from then I just ran to the escape room. Was exploring a barely used salt mine near Kansas City. We were trespassing, but we eventually made our way to the outskirts of the mine, and we tripped over a half-buried blue bag. Nothing out of the ordinary until we dug it out and find a fucking buckle shoe and animal skulls inside. I'm talking like a shoe from the fucking 1940s. We then found a BB gun made out of pure steel, and it all kind of came together that maybe it was just some kid's old hunting bag. I don't know. Still wish I kept that shoe and BB gun. They looked antique. We were playing paintball in an old abandoned school, and I opened a closet door. Inside the closet was a somewhat recently dead pigeon laying near a nest, covered in blood, with a giant pigeon egg in the nest. It was fucking weird. The basement of the school was pitch black because there was no electricity, but in one of the corners there was a room with windows, so there was sunlight. In the room they apparently stored old student projects, and there was a bunch of them, as well as old scattered construction paper clowns the kids must have made years ago. It's all contextually explainable, but weird as fuck. Not sure how to post the pic, but me and a few friends went to an abandoned theme park, Camelot in England, at about 3 a.m. on a summer's night. We took a lot of pictures, and when we looked back at them, we genuinely got a picture of a ghost. I wasn't a believer of ghosts until I saw the pic I took on my own phone. We went back the next night and took a picture in the exact same spot, and there's nothing there. We didn't see the ghost with our eyes while we were there, but it's definitely a ghost in the picture. We also got chased off a creepy lone security guard that night. He chased us through a forest on his own, threatening to murder us. We're 4 big guys, but something about one man on his own chasing you through a pitch black forest at 3:30 a.m. is fucking scary. I almost shat my pants. I once went to an old veneer facility with a friend in my hometown. At first we checked the upper floors, the roof, and all in all made some great photos of the facility. We decided to go into the basement, where we found something very unexpected. There was a homeless guy sleeping, covered in trash and bad-smelling plastic bags. At first we thought he was dead, but then he started snoring like a lawnmower. We decided to leave and didn't come back again. Did exploring on a huge farm that used to be a place where slaves were stored back when slavery was still legal. Me, my dad, a guy with a metal detector, and a cameraman. The place was creepy, the air heavy, and some places freezing cold. We found some really old coins, personal items, and belt buckles. Most depressing or disturbing thing is that the place where the slaves used to be chained to the walls, till this day, there were some pieces of chain left, still attached to the wall. The creepiest feeling was the one of being watched at all times, and the crew kept hearing people speaking, but in a rednecky but quite old-fashioned way, like they did in the old times, despite not seeing anything. The creepiest thing was hearing a male voice screaming for us to get the hell out of his property. I was exploring an abandoned brewery here in the Twin Cities. We brought some joints along and we were smoking. This guy came out of nowhere asking, "Where the party at? Where the weed at? And finally, where the money at?" As he said this, he pulled a gun out of his waistband and loaded one into the chamber and just started shooting around us. Like honestly, we probably would have given it up if he hadn't just started shooting right away. He was shooting way up above our heads. In hindsight, it was pretty obvious that he was just trying to scare us and not shoot us. It worked. We ran like motherfucking bats out of hell. I'm a pretty big dude. I could definitely stand to lose a few pounds, especially back then. I scaled a 12-foot fence like I was fucking Usain Bolt. I'm late to this, but me and my friends explored an old factory. We found a weird room with a locked padlock door. Only room in the place that was locked. We found a different way in and found dead chickens laying on the floor and chairs in a circle. Probably cult stuff, but we got out of there. Long story short, we were exploring an old restaurant that my friend had worked at some time before. Actually, the main purpose was to exchange some equipment for our new building. We heard a car outside, so decided it was time to leave. We round the corner to the exit, and 2 cops were behind cover with their guns drawn. That was scary. They let us go because we had good explanation and actually had permission to be there and had keys to the building. This was back in 2015 or 16. I used to explore the silos that are off Damon, Chicago. A group of friends of mine were exploring the building that the river submerged the bottom part of. In that small pond that formed inside of the building was a body wrapped in mountains and mountains of black plastic garbage bags. Scariest shit I ever witnessed. Never went back. Not really urban exploration, but definitely something disturbing I found while exploring. I was walking through some unowned woodland area, and when I found a bizarre clearing, seemed like some homeless people made their camp there with mattresses and some old blankets. It seemed okay, until I looked at the center. A huge charred area with scorched, something jutting out of it in all directions. I'd say it was wood, but it looked way too squishy and stringy to be wood. It got worse when I saw bones litter the general area as well. To top it all off, the exit had a rotting dog carcass, but it wasn't too concerning since you find a lot of those where I live. Definitely something disturbing about that fire pit though. What is the strangest or scariest noise you ever heard at night? Oh, I have a story. I used to live with my parents in a busy suburb, but in a house that backed up on a stretch of road. We got lots of wildlife, from deer to possums and foxes, whose cries were freaky sounding, but I was used to them. Railroad tracks ran through the wood, and on the other side of the tracks were walking trails that are closed at night. One summer night, I came home from a night out with friends around 1 a.m. and, As I went to open the door, I heard what sounded like a person talking on a walkie-talkie near the edge of the woods. I ran inside crying and told my parents about it. They couldn't see or hear anything. The window in my bedroom had the outer pane stuck open, so it was really easy to hear outdoor noises from my bedroom. A few nights later, I heard the sound again from my bed. It was a crackly, distorted human voice, sounding like it was coming through a walkie-talkie or a radio. Again, I went crying to my mom, freaking out that someone was camping in the woods or watching us or something, or that people were planning to rob us. She couldn't really hear anything. I heard it on and off for a few days. I was barely sleeping and my nerves were shot. The sounds had a weird rhythm to them, like a recording on a loop, and almost sounded like someone counting. I thought I could make out the numbers 17 and 33. All I could think was that it sounded like some kind of numbers radio station, if you've heard of those. Finally, I managed to record some of the sounds and shared them online to figure out what was up. You're probably guessing I'm going to tell you I had a psychotic break or was hallucinating, but no. Turns out there was a perfectly rational explanation. The creek bed in the woods was usually dry, but recent heavy rains had filled it up and a pair of green frogs had moved in. If you look up their calls, you'll hear they're often compared to a banjo string, but they happen to be at a similar pitch as human voices. My hearing is slightly garbled due to congestion from allergies to grass pollen, flares up in summer, and I heard the frog calls as distorted human voices. To this day, when I hear a green frog call, it instantly reminds me of that scary week or so in the summer of 18. Oh yeah, and I found out a year later that I have an anxiety disorder. There were some gunshots right near my house, and because of other buildings nearby, they echoed super loud. I'm in a gentrifying area, so we do hear gunshots and fireworks from time, but they're usually pretty faint because we're in an interior part of our townhouse complex. But these were right up on a raised trail right near our house. There's a taller brick loft building on the other side of the trail, and it was dead of night when we were asleep, so they sounded like something out of a war movie. Peacock screaming. Seriously thought a woman was being murdered. I frantically woke up my friend and told her we needed to call the police. I told her what I heard, and she told me the neighbor up the street had peacocks, and that's what I was hearing. I was convinced a lady was being murdered. The next day, we walked down to the neighbor's ranch so I could see the peacocks. Sure enough, it made that awful sound while I was there. I woke up sometime around midnight and heard my mother going into her room to sleep. We live in a small flat and the walls are a bit thin. As soon as she closed the door to her room, there were footsteps in the hallway running towards my room and abruptly stopping in front of my door. I knew it wasn't my mom because she just went to bed, and my brother wasn't at home, so it couldn't be him either. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, but I stayed awake for about 2 more hours to make sure nothing came into my room or anything. My boyfriend and I were on a road trip around the western US in 1981. We were in northern Colorado and arrived at a state campground at dusk. The campground was full except for the group camping area that unoccupied, so they directed us to use it. The camping area was far from the regular campground, very secluded feeling. We picked a nice spot by a meadow and pitched a tent. It was late and we went to bed. We were lying in the tent, beginning to drift off to sleep when we heard quiet sounds of movement all around and close to the tent. We then heard short, breathy whistle sounds, then more quiet whistle sounds. We knew it was a herd of deer, but whistles? We listened to them for about half an hour until they moved away. A very magical experience. Okay, my house was haunted and no one saw or heard a thing. I was 16 at the time and my family moved into a house. There were rumors that those houses were haunted. There were many creepy instances. One instance was when I had sleep paralysis and woke up in a cold sweat. I ran over to my sister. We slept in the same room but different beds, and slept with her instead. I woke up under her bed with the blanket wrapped around my body burrito style, and it was being pulled by what I saw toddler legs, little shoes, white tube socks, and khaki shorts. He was pulling my blanket. This went on for some time because I felt paralyzed. I woke up, it was still night, and ran over to my parents' room and slept there. Another time was when I was sleeping in the shared room with my sister and I heard hooves walking down the hallway. I only heard 2 sets of hooves. I grew up on a farm, so I know that it sounded like hooves. The steps stopped in front of my door. I built up the courage and again ran into my parents' room. I told my parents this story and no one believed me. Another time was when my mom and I were watching TV. Next to the TV was the laundry room. The laundry door room was heavy, and the doorknob had to be turned all the way in order to open it. Well, in front of my mom and I, the doorknob clicked, and the door slowly swung open. The other side of the door was the garage. My mom told me it was my dad. I ran up to see if he was there, and no one was. I told my mom to come look, yelling for my dad or anyone who was there, and no one was. Another night was when I was sleeping with my sisters in one queen bed, my two sisters and I, and something just ran across the bed. The whole room was pitch black, and I was the only one who felt that. After we moved out, no one told me they experienced anything. Now I thankfully don't hear or see anything like that. Not the best neighborhood. Late at night, heard a woman screaming for help about a block from my place near a corner store. Grabbed a friend and went to check it out. Realized it was coming from behind the store, but as we got closer, also realized it sounded like some kind of recording playing out of a speaker, or maybe a phone turned all the way up. Definitely not a person. Noped out. I was up late, trying to sleep, and I heard a scream outside my window, and it fucking terrified me. I ran to the bathroom, turned on the lights, and hid in the shower. Heard it again outside the bathroom window. I cried and fell asleep in the bathtub. Later discovered it was just some cats fighting, but I swear during the night I thought it was a little kid. After a huge family fallout between my parents, I went back to my college apartment and contemplated a lot of things. Life, trust, love, family structure, sacrifice, needs, and wants. It honestly shook my heart and soul. I just wanted to be away from everything, and no one was at the apartment then, away from for the summer. One night, I felt melancholic and sat outside at the back of my apartment one night, just moonlight, still pondering thoughts quite loudly. I start hearing the end theme to Hereditary. It really took my breath out of my body and thought I was losing my mind or something. It was just from upstairs. They had opened the back door a bit, and their deck was a bit cracked, so the noise was coming from behind rather than just above me. It was scary as fuck, but still beautiful in its way. This qualifies for both strange and scary in my opinion. When I was 11, I could hear breathing under my bed. It was slightly louder than you'd expect a normal person to be, but not excessive or exaggerated. I was terrified and assumed I was dreaming at first, so I did the usual trick like pinching myself to see if I was dreaming. I also held my breath and covered my nose and mouth to be 100% sure I wasn't just hearing my own body. The noise was definitely under my bed. After what felt like half an hour, I finally took a quick look under the bed and saw nothing unusual at all. At the time, I had lots of boxes stored under there, so nobody could have been hiding. Eventually, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I probably stayed awake for 1 to 2 hours just listening to it, scared shitless. The next morning was completely normal, as if nothing had happened. Edit. I didn't have any pets and my family wasn't into pranks. I never experienced anything like this again, nor have I ever hallucinated or had any medical conditions which could explain it. The breathing, or whatever it was too consistent to have been wind or something caused by environment. The house I was in didn't have any fans or vents either, and the window was closed tight. I still have no explanation. 3 a.m. Woman singing inside the apartment. Me, an idiot, 5'2" woman, jumped out of bed and go in to investigate. Go into living room. Singing stops. Go back to bedroom. Singing starts again. Run back into living room, ready to protect my boyfriend from whatever fucker is in our home. Finds out it's my busted up, possessed by a demon laptop that is turned on by itself and is playing the ending song to The Haunting of Bly Manor. I have no idea why I went to investigate. I'm usually a scaredy cat, but maybe I was still asleep enough to not have the sense to feel fear yet to know. I was more pissed about being woken up than anything. I was walking through some woods in rural Pennsylvania in the wee hours of the morning, and all around me was almost complete darkness. I knew the path because I had walked it several times, but there was more light then. I heard a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream off in the distance behind me. I had assumed it was an animal in heat or some sort of bird, but then it got closer and closer and closer, right until it was next to my left side, screaming directly into my ear. I never looked to see what it was because I was both terrified and wanted to get the fuck out of there, as well as I probably wouldn't have been able to see it anyhow. Eventually, the noise grew further away and I booked it once it was no longer in earshot. I worked the third shift and was listening to the No Sleep podcast when suddenly, in the middle of one of the male voice actors talking, I heard a woman screaming. It took me a minute to realize it wasn't part of the show. I went to the door, and there was a lady outside screaming for help, so I opened the door and asked what was wrong. She told me one of the drivers from the trucking company down the street from our store had jumped out of his cab, grabbed a woman off the street, and then threw her in his trailer. I'm pretty skeptical of this because no one is working, but I let her use the phone to call the police. She does and leaves. Then she just walks off. Some cops show up later to talk to her, and they both go their separate ways. I don't see her again until I'm getting off work, getting into my car, when she starts screaming at me from the street about how I don't care about anything and I'm just another asshole. Just one of the many perks of working alone in the industrial area. Serious. What is the scariest thing you have seen ever? I don't know if it would be classified as scary, but more the most traumatizing thing I ever witnessed. My 20-year-old brother shot himself, and I was there when my mom had to identify the body. The sound she made was like nothing I've ever heard. It wasn't a scream. It was just this terrible sound that I'll never forget. My brother losing consciousness and falling down the stairs. He lay on the floor with his eyes open and blood coming out of his ear. He was fine after one day at the hospital, but I sure as hell thought I just witnessed the death of my brother. My dad and grandma waiting for me at the top of our driveway when I got off the bus coming home from kindergarten. My mother had breast cancer, and the moment I saw them waiting there together, I knew she was dead. We had a long driveway to begin with, but that day it felt like it took an eternity to climb. I knew what they were going to say, but I still dreaded hearing it. I've never felt that kind of terror since. This happened just this past weekend. Came home to find my brother blacked out, and when he came to, he could barely stand and walk, was in an altered mental state, talking like he was drunk. He hadn't eaten or drank anything but water in 3 days, and had been sleeping pretty much around the clock. Turns out he's diabetic now, and was experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis. Spent the weekend in the ICU. He blacked out before he was so dehydrated that his heart couldn't properly pump blood, and his blood pressure was bottoming out while his heart rate was skyrocketing. His blood glucose was sky high. He's doing better now, thankfully, but I thought I was watching my big brother, my best friend, die right in front of me at the time. I grew up in Tanzania. When I was 8, my family was driving home through the city at night, and I saw a girl, probably not much older than me, running through traffic. Her clothes were ripped like someone tore them off of her. We made eye contact for a second, and the genuine fear in her eyes is completely unforgettable. A man ran after her about 30 seconds later and pissed beyond belief. I obviously don't know the whole story, but I'm willing to bet she was trying to escape sexual abuse. I still wonder if he caught her, and if he did, if she made it out. The Black Saturday bushfires. We were in a small town where my grandmother lived, helping her pack up to get to safety. The fire was moving so fast we had maybe 1 minute to move if they sounded the warning to leave. Watching the horizon change color from black to a dark orange to a full wall of flames in a matter of minutes is fucking intense. The trees exploded from the intensity of the heat, making these dull popping sounds amongst what sounded like rain from ash and embers falling everywhere. It's worth noting that the town is nestled amongst a bunch of hills and dense bushland with treacherous terrain, and we were almost completely surrounded. Every hill glowed for hours. Driving on a toll road during rush hour, these guys on motorcycles start splitting the lanes. There's about 6 of them racing each other, whooping and laughing as they block the guy in back from passing. He cuts across a lane to try and pass them by going up the other side. I hear someone honk to try and warn him right before the guy hit a big chunk of tire tread that had peeled off a semi-truck. Dude managed to stay on his bike, lays it down, and then pinballs off a car and under a big semi-truck. Everyone slammed on their brakes as this happens, and traffic stops dead. I see his bike slide down the concrete barrier without him, and then the truck pulled forward. The guy was laying on the shoulder of the road. People start putting cars in park and getting out to help as his friends start cutting the lanes against traffic to come back for him. And this guy sits up. He stands. He can't lift one arm at all, and his helmet has huge gouges out of the side, but someone started hollering. Then he lifts his good arm up in a fist, and everyone just lost it, honking and shouting. This whole freeway thought we just watched him die, and instead we were cheering like crazy. One of his buddies helped him onto the back of his bike. A guy in a pickup grabbed the bike and people got back in their cars as they cut through traffic and took the next exit. The scariest thing wasn't dramatic, just horrifying, was falling asleep with my kid when he was sick and waking up at 2 a.m. to check on him. His fever was 41.2 degrees Celsius, 106 degrees Fahrenheit. I poured 5 milliliters of Tylenol down his throat and carried him out to the car to go to the hospital. As I unlocked the car, I slipped on ice and fell, twisting so he landed in about 60 centimeters, 2 feet of snow instead of the concrete. He didn't even stir, didn't flinch, just nothing. He didn't even open his eyes or squirm when the snow hit his bare skin. I took off his coat and put him in the car with the windows down to try and cool him off. I called the hospital as we drove. They were able to get his fever under control and prevent any lasting damage at the hospital, but seeing him lay limp and quiet as a ragdoll in the snow was horrifying. Another convict begging the COs not to let him die as he nearly bled out after having his throat cut from ear to ear. It was the begging that I can't forget. I had seen someone killed before and it didn't affect me nearly as much. Seeing my sweet, kind, terrified mother crying out for death as she dealt with a huge tumor in her esophagus that prevented her from swallowing after having brain surgery to remove another tumor to help with quality of life. Fuck cancer. I was a receptionist at a trucking company. I was sitting at the front desk and all of a sudden there was the loudest sound ever, and as I looked out the window I saw a small building fly up in the air. Found out later that a welder and his helper had tried to weld something and there was an explosion. They both died. That was pretty sad. Finding my husband in a full cardiac arrest. Thankfully I found him very quickly and was able to commence CPR and save his life. There's a slim chance of survival for cardiac arrest, so I'm grateful it happened a couple of minutes after I got home. Most terrifying moment of my life. Finding this young dude after he'd been stabbed like 7 times and trying to comfort him. I knew the guy was going to die, and I think he did too. About a year of sleepless nights and moderate case of PTSD later, I've come to terms with what happened. Someone already covered 9/11, so I'll add one that's more existential fear. Seeing my dad in recovery after heart surgery. It was only then I really realized how mortal and vulnerable he was, and that he wasn't going to be around forever. I saw a guy on a bike get hit by a car. Guy blew through a crosswalk on his bike when he wasn't supposed to. Car came to a stop and bumped him. Car was going maybe 2 miles an hour, but the dude still got flown a good 6 feet. You don't really think about how big and heavy cars are until you see something like that. Anyway, dude got up, shaky as all fuck, waved at the car, then pedaled off. Nuts to see. I survived a plane crash. It was far and away the scariest thing I've ever witnessed. Second behind that was watching a van full of people wrap around a bridge underpass pillar. The driver fell asleep behind the wheel. 6 of the 7 people died. The 7th person was laying in the back seat sleeping and avoided being crushed. Strangely enough, about 5 years after that accident, I was in basic for the army and met a girl that lived a few hours north of me. She knew the people who were killed and their funerals were in her high school gym. It's a small world, folks. It was spring of 1995. I was flying back from San Antonio on maybe my 10th trip there. I suppose by this time I'd flown probably 50 or so times, so I thought I was a seasoned traveler. I was flying American Airlines. I flew from San Antonio to Dallas. It's the hub of American Airlines. Before my connecting flight to Des Moines took off, a nasty thunderstorm came in. Even so, we all boarded the plane and sat out on the tarmac waiting for the tower to let us take off. 3 hours passed. I had a clear view of one of the windsocks, and it was pretty much flailing at 45 degrees most of that time. When the captain announced that we could take off, the windsock was completely, solidly horizontal, and the storm was at its worst. We took off, buffeted by winds all the way down the runway. 15 seconds after takeoff, we dropped for a good 5 seconds. The plane fought like crazy to attain altitude, and then it would drop again. It was nuts. I grabbed the bottom of my seat because I thought my seatbelt wouldn't hold. Yeah, it was that bad. I remember looking up the aisle during one of the drops, and I could see the front of the plane instantly drop like 45 degrees or so, simply because inertia kept my head stationary. Back then, they had phones in the back of the seats, so after about 5 minutes of this insanity, I figured I'd call my wife to say goodbye. It took a minute or so before I could grab a hold of it. I had to brace one arm with another just to disengage it from the back of the seat in front of me. It took a lot of tries, and after a couple of minutes, I was able to clumsily type in the number as well as my credit card information. Of course, I got our answering machine. We'd fight for altitude like crazy for like 15 seconds, then fall for 5. Constantly. The captain came on and said this was going to last for 20 minutes or so until they broke out of the storm near Oklahoma. Yep, that's how long it lasted. After the fun times, somewhere over Missouri, I struck up a conversation with one of the flight attendants. She told me that was the worst turbulence that she'd ever experienced. She was somewhere in her 40s, so I figured it must have been pretty unusual. I received a letter from American Airlines roughly 2 weeks later. It was clearly edited by various attorneys, but it was clearly meant to be an apology letter. I wish I had saved it. Lesson learned. Don't fly out of Dallas in the spring or summer on American Airlines. Don't. Maybe things have changed now, but I still won't do it. Bus doors closing on me with my mother on the other side as a child and seeing her chase the bus down to get me out. It's not that my mother wasn't watching me. I just found a coin on the ground and of course me being a kid I picked it up and the dickhead bus driver was too impatient to wait for me to leave. It was literally a 6-second window between my mother getting off and the door shutting. Thank goodness she made enough noise outside for him to stop and let me out. When my son was 18 months old, I fed him a PB&J for the first time for lunch, and my wife said he'd already had some at daycare. I laid him down for a nap, and a short time later, like usual after lunch. About 45 minutes later, he woke up crying, and I could tell that he was in pain. I rushed to the room to find him completely swollen. I instantly knew he was allergic to peanuts. I did a 10-minute drive to the hospital in less than 5 minutes. The whole time I was thinking his throat would close and I would have to watch my baby boy die in the back seat. I got him there and everything ended up being fine as they treated him instantly. Thankfully, his reaction to peanuts so far has only ever been a surface reaction and no throat closing. He's 11 now, and to this day I've never experienced anything more scary. My baby sister fell into our pool a year and a half ago. She was pronounced dead at the time. She's okay now, but pretty heavily disabled, and I saw the ambulance taking her through the house on a stretcher. I have no issue with seeing adults dead, but a 1-year-old baby girl who was perfectly fine just minutes before, now looking cold, stiff, and yellowy blue, was the most horrific thing I've ever seen. The baby fat and cuteness was gone, and it was just bloated blue dead skin. She was technically still alive at that point, but my God, that image will never leave me. A near-miss accident on the motorway. Felt like it damn near stopped my heart, and time absolutely slowed down. It was in front of me, so I played out how many cars would be in the pileup, and if I couldn't avoid it, where I would end up, and how could I minimize damage to my own car so as to avoid damage to myself and my passenger. In Hawaii, I was on a paddleboard no less than a mile out on the ocean, and I was training for a race I was going to enter. I saw this enormous thing under me, 12 or 13 feet long and 3 or 4 feet across, easy. At first I thought it was a rock, but then it moved. It was a fucking huge mako shark swimming right under me. It must have been pregnant or something, because that's the only time they would be in water that shallow. The thing was no less than 10 feet under me. My stomach went right up to my throat, and I just put my head down and paddled as hard as I could and didn't stop until I was about 3 miles further away. The look on my OBGYN's face when she said, "I think we need to do a C-section now." I got tunnel vision at that moment and couldn't see anyone else in the room. At every single prenatal visit, she had always been the most genuinely upbeat person I've ever met, even smiling and sweet when I saw her at 6 a.m. one morning in the hospital after I'd heard her coaching a delivery in the next room at 3 a.m. the night before. In that moment, she looked so goddamn grave it made me sick. I'd already been hearing my son's heart rate falling with every contraction for the past hour, and I was so terrified that I had come all this way and would never actually get to see my little boy. It turned out he had the umbilical cord wrapped both around his neck and around his rib cage like a toga. I held my breath till he cried and didn't offer to let a single person who came to visit me hold him the entire stay at the hospital. I just had to keep reminding myself that he was safe now and perfectly healthy, because those last 15 minutes of pregnancy were terrifying. Was a trucker back in 2012. Was driving along the interstate one night when I see what appears to be a large black dog jump out from the right shoulder over to my lane where I slammed into it. The truck seemed to shudder quite horribly. The 2 fridges, my microwave, my printer, and most of my clothes all came crashing down off my top bunk. I saw the front hood literally pop up, blocking my view for an instant before slamming back down. Keep in mind these hoods are hinged at the front and tilt forward to open. I saw it appear to tilt back like a normal car would, meaning the hood was ripped from its hinges. I was fully loaded at almost 80,000 pounds with 4 massive paper rolls, and the impact slowed me down from 55 miles per hour to about 30, and the engine was chugging, still in 10th gear. Instantly, I figured I must have ran into a bear. To my surprise, the headlights were still working, and a quick check of my gauges showed everything to still be functioning, at least for now, and the truck was still driving normally. And I wasn't about to stop in case there were more bears around. Even if a tire started going flat, you'd be surprised just how far you can drive on a flat in a truck. So I flicked my hazards on, warned everyone on the CB that I just ran over a literal bear. Bear is CB slang for police, so had to specify a literal bear. I get to a truck stop about 5 miles later, eyes glued to the temperature gauge the whole time, expecting to run out of coolant at any moment and start overheating. I pull in, get out to check the damage, and to my absolute horror, my truck is in absolutely perfect condition. There wasn't a scratch on it. Fiberglass front end was perfect, no sign of any impact. I opened the hood, perfect. Hinge was perfect. Radiator and intercooler perfect. All the crap had fallen off my top bunk was all over the cab floor, so I knew the impact happened. I almost shit my pants with fear at seeing that. The strange sinking feeling you get when the roller coaster gets to the top and you're looking straight down, it was like that, but times 100. I hauled ass out of there the rest of the night till I got out of state, when an hour or so over my legal time. Later found out about an old trucker legend of the black dog. They say the black dog will jump in front of you, causing truckers to crash in order to avoid it. Good thing in trucking school we're taught to never swerve or brake hard to avoid a crash, as ramming someone is a lot safer than flipping your 80,000-pound truck of a car. The even stranger thing, the next morning I checked my load. The paper rolls had not shifted. When they load these type of rolls, they generally put 2 almost all the way down the trailer toward the front, about 6 feet or so from the front wall. Then they put the 2 closer to the rear of the trailer to balance the weight and prevent the trailer from breaking in half, from having all the weight right in the middle. But even stopping a little hard, like when someone cuts you off, is enough to get them to slide forward and bear down all their weight on the rear truck tires to the point they look flat. Yet they had not moved an inch, literally impossible. I get a call the next morning asking if I was in an accident last night, as the truck's onboard accelerometer recorded a significant impact and deceleration from 55 miles per hour to 30 in less than a second, but thought it was a glitch as the radar didn't detect anything or apply the brakes. Trucks have a radar to detect slow cars and will slam on your brakes automatically to avoid a crash. I explained the whole situation, texted him pics of my trashed cab, but not a scratch on the truck itself, and the load being exactly where it was initially loaded. They had me stop at a nearby shop to do an inspection to make sure nothing on the truck was damaged, and it all came back perfect. I will never know what the hell happened that night. Serious. What's your paranormal story that actually happened? In high school, I had a friend whose family had a dog. I loved this dog and she loved me. I lost touch with the friend and never saw the dog again. One day I randomly missed the dog so much and started crying. Next day the friend's mom contacted me to say the dog was put to sleep yesterday. I like to think it was the dog's ghost saying goodbye to me. Okay, so I was like 8 or 9 and my brother was like 10 or 11, and at the time we shared a room. Both of us woke up around 1 a.m. and could hear singing. Not really thinking much of it at first, we think maybe it's the TV in our parents' room. Our room was at the end of the hall, but if you turned left at the end of it, it opened up to the living room and kitchen. Then besides those, at the other ends of the house is my parents' room. So we could see the light at the end of the hallway from their TV. So leave the room to go turn off their TV, and as soon as we leave the room, like one step out the door frame, and the singing was gone. Immediately, both my brother and I are freaked out. We go back into our room, and we can hear the singing again. My brother opened one of our windows and stuck his head outside to see if maybe it was coming from there, and said that the singing sounded like it was coming from inside. So we're kind of sitting there confused and freaked out and start to listen to the singing to see if we can still tell what it is. It was kind of quiet and muffled sounding. As soon as we started actively listening to the singing, it seemed to get clearer, to the point it sounded like someone was playing music on their phone in our room. The thing that really freaked us out was when we realized we couldn't understand the singing, like it was in some language neither of us had ever heard before. I remember thinking at the time that it was in like Egyptian or something like that, something really old. So, this music that we can't understand is loud, especially being at this point like 1:30 to 2 in the morning. We don't want to hear it, so we can think, so we can leave and go sit in the bathroom. Once again, as soon as we left our room, we couldn't hear it anymore. We talked about what it could be and what it sounded like. I remember him saying that the only thing he could make out that sounded remotely English was the end of each like line of words. It sounded like it was saying, "come on," but it was like drawn out and almost sad. I'm freaked out so bad that I started crying. I just wanted it to stop so I could go to sleep and forget about it. My brother and I didn't want to wake up our parents. We obviously didn't think they'd believe us, and being like 2 a.m., they'd be pretty annoyed with us. After about 15-ish minutes of talking, my brother decided he wanted to record the singing so we could show our parents. We went back into our room, singing surrounds us, and my brother grabs his little MP3 player. One of the things it could do was record sound, so my brother turns it on. I'm standing behind him since he's sitting on the floor, and I see the MP3 has 3 bars of its battery left. He scrolls over to record, opens the recorder, and hits record. The second that his finger left the button, the MP3 player died. Me being only 8 or 9, I was confused and asked what happened. There were 3 bars in the battery still. And that's when he explained to me he thought the singing was some kind of ghost because of everything that's going on, plus ghosts can drain the power of electronics. I sit back down on my bed, scared. My brother sits on his bed. We listened to the singing till about 3 a.m. before it suddenly stopped. Like right after we heard the drawn-out "come on," it stopped. We waited like 5 minutes to see if maybe it would come back. After it didn't, I decided to go right to sleep. My brother stayed up a bit longer but passed out soon after as well. We never did tell our parents because we knew at that point they wouldn't believe us. We never heard the singing again. Eventually, my brother moved into a room in our basement, and I kept that room till we moved out of that house. We lived in that house about 14 years, and I spent around 10 of those years in that room. Never had another experience like that. Real quick, to give a better idea of what the singing looked like or sounded like, I guess. It was like lyrics, like this, then, at the end, "come on." And it just repeated like this over and over, "come on." The entire time, just over and over, "come on." It was weird. Almost seemed to echo, and had like a reverb or whatever, like you hear a word and then the end of the word is said again all quiet and distorted right after. I was house-sitting my friend's cat, and I accidentally disturbed the cat on the bed. When I turned to look at the cat, it hissed at me, gave me the death look, and suddenly, one of my eyeglass lenses shattered. I'll do a recent one. Saturday, May 8th, 2021 at approximately 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time. I work in a large warehouse that doesn't have many people in it on Saturdays and Sundays after the daytime. People leave sometimes between 4 and 5. By not many people, I mean none. Well, none in my massive section of the building. Since there's not a lot to do, I hide in the back corner where the cameras can't see me and just dick around until the last half hour of my shift when I actually have something to do. When it's windy, the walls will sometimes creak and groan against their supports. I've been hiding in this corner for quite a number of weekends. I'm used to these noises. Then, from the back wall that runs perpendicular to the aisles, I hear a loud woman's sigh. Not a lot of women work there, but I brushed it off as being the wind acting funny on the walls again, even though I've literally never heard anything like that sound before. That was 6:45. Then an hour later, I'm still in the corner, reading a creepy Ask Reddit thread like this one, not kidding, when, from a few slots into the aisle directly in front of me comes, "Oh hello," in the exact same voice. Nobody there. If there was, not only would I have seen them coming from quite a ways away, but they would have tripped the motion sensor lights that line the ceiling above every aisle. My first thought was that it was the wind, but it wasn't windy. Besides, I would have heard the usual creaks and groans in tandem with it. Also, I'm pretty damn sure that the wall isn't going to sound like a woman's voice, especially in two separate spots. Thing is, directly in front of me was metal racking. From where I was only likely to be noticed once someone walking down that aisle got near the end, which was where the voice came from. She sounded surprised, as though she wasn't expecting to see somebody there, and thought she had the warehouse to herself. I tried to gain the courage to say something, but couldn't, because the thought of hearing her response weirded me out too much. I wasn't as scared as I was startled. I wanted to talk to her, but just wasn't mentally ready for it. Then, a few minutes later, I heard her farther down the aisle. 3 more syllables, but no idea what she said. She was walking away from me. Well, screw you then, I thought to myself. I couldn't quite will myself to sit back down and go back to my Reddit thread, so I hung around for a bit, contemplated what had just happened, and eventually left after 20 minutes or so. I don't think the warehouse is haunted, though various people have seen and heard various things over time. From their accounts, I'm sure that it's different entities, but they wander the area and only show up in the warehouse when they think it's empty. Most encounters happen near holidays, so this was unusual in that respect. I sat in the same corner the following week, but she didn't show up again. Not that I expected her to, but I was a bit disappointed anyway. She sounded to be in her early 20s or so I could have used a friend. When I was about 7, I would be home alone usually around 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Parents had work and my sister went over her friends daily. I lived in a small but old apartment, nothing too crazy or ghost-worthy. Decided one day to go to the cabinet in our dining room for something to eat like I usually would. It's in a small separate room. Only things in there were a fridge, table, and this giant cabinet. I had my hair up in a ponytail, and as soon as I went to pick up a cup of ramen, someone yanked my hair super hard and made my head bounce back. The room was completely empty and was dead silent. To say the least, I ran to my room and kept the door locked. In the same house, I also woke up around 5 a.m., couldn't sleep, and just was staring off into space, waiting to fall asleep again or doze off. All of a sudden, the blinds to my window swung up halfway and slammed down on my window so loud I thought my parents would wake up and yell at me. Window was closed, and I didn't get to sleep at all. Last one I can think of in that place was me waking up again super early in the morning. It was still night out, and my sister was dead asleep next to me. There was this door in our bedroom that led to a staircase shared by all 3 apartments in the building. Kind of as like a storage space everyone could access. Anyway, the door started to knock. Then the knocking turned to banging and I heard scratching. It sounded like someone was trying to break in super desperately, and my heart dropped down to my stomach. I turned on our princess nightlight and sat there for what felt like years, listening and panicking that someone was going to break in. Then it stopped. No breathing, no footsteps, no sign of anyone being there, nobody leaving the area. I waited and still silence. I still will never know if that was some robber or a demon. Small other incidents were like hearing someone run at me despite being alone, having someone yell "hey" at me when I woke up, and hearing a hovering UFO noise outside my window at sunrise. Wild stuff. Closest thing I can say is odd noises at night at my workplace. An example, last night as I work alone, I heard a chain jingle in my ear. Some nights I can hear random footsteps or whistling. I'm not one to say they don't exist, but certainly seems an odd place as I work for the US Postal Service and I just sort mail that came during the day, though I suppose it used to be a factory of some sort as the air hoses are still there. We just have no use for them and haven't removed them, I guess. My parents used to clean a building for a lighting company that's in my city. My mom has some kind of energy attached to her when she gets angry, and certain things can happen. We were cleaning the building one evening and she was very angry at my dad for some reason. As she walks down a hallway of offices, their doors open, all slammed shut without any kind of pulling nor motion towards the door. My dad and I have no idea what happened. We just know that my mom was connected to this anomaly somehow. She put no effort into closing the doors and they just closed by themselves. She also does this with lights and water. I have a few, but I'll tell the most memorable one. My dad works at a place that is generally accepted by all who work there to be haunted. Everyone has at least a few stories to tell about the place, so my dad, being the manager, was able to set up an amateur ghost hunting session for the two of us. We got there at around midnight and we started making our way through the warehouse. The building made lots of ambient noises, so it was hard at first to differentiate normal sounds of the building to a possible paranormal one. It seemed like not much activity was happening when we first started the investigation. Later in the night, however, things started to feel ominous. The best way I can describe it was that it was like we were being watched. My dad and I both thought we heard what sounded like a pallet sliding across the floor, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything move. Toward the end of the investigation, we go to one corner of the warehouse where a lot of activity has been reported by other workers. It's noticeably a lot quieter than the rest of the warehouse too. There was a box up against the wall and my dad decided to sit on the box to see if anything would happen. I go to sit next to him and right in between us we hear a knock on the wall. If you were to take your fist and knock on your wall as if it was a door, that's what it sounded like. We both jumped up in a panic and tried to figure out what the hell happened. At first, we thought that another box that was leaning on the wall caused the noise, but when we tested it, the sound was softer, for lack of a better word, and you could hear the sound of the tape crinkling, which was completely absent from the knock earlier. Needless to say, we packed it up after that and headed home. There are some other stories my family experienced, but that by far is one of the more unexplainable experiences I've had. I have 3, 2 short, 1 long. First one was when my mom and I were both sitting in my room talking. My dad had left and there was no one else in the house. In the middle of our conversation, we heard the water faucet to the sink in the bathroom turn on. The bathroom is directly across from my room, so I opened the door after looking at my non for confirmation that we're both hearing this. And sure enough, the water is on full blast. I go shut it off and search the house to end up with nothing. 10 minutes later, my dad comes home and we tell him what happened. To give some detail, the sink had rotating handles. Second one, my house has 2 basements, one below the kitchen that's 3/4 underground, and another one below that that's underground. At the bottom of the stairs, there's a room to the left and a room straight ahead. The room straight ahead is the laundry and sewing room, and the room to the left is mine. One summer, my mom decided to take up selling Mary Kay, and had a ton of boxes stacked everywhere in the sewing room. One day, I went downstairs, turned left, and almost immediately, I swear I heard all of the boxes stacked up fall. It was the loudest thing I've heard. It sounded like a heavy glass breaking and boxes being smashed. I thought everyone heard it, but no one came to check, so I slowly turned around and peeked into the room to see nothing moved. I even asked my parents, who were upstairs, and they never heard anything. Final. One night in my basement room, I was watching TV. Now hearing footsteps in the kitchen has become pretty normal. All of a sudden, I think I hear the sound of scissors fall from the desk in the sewing room. I didn't think much of it, but I kept an ear focused in case something was in there. 5 minutes later, I hear some heavy-ass work boots slowly take 4 to 5 steps, and I instantly freeze. These weren't the light tip-taps that we normally hear. I instantly think that someone opened a window and climbed into the house, but I would have heard the window open. I lower the volume and keep listening. 10 minutes later, I hear footsteps again and some clanging. At this point, I think they are leaning against the washer or dryer and a zipper is hitting it. I get close to the curtains that act as a door to my room, and I tell myself if I hear breathing, I'm going to lose my mind. I wait as 3 minutes pass, and I occasionally hear the clang of metal, but then it stops, and I actually hear 2 footsteps and exhaling. I quietly lose my shit and hide in a corner, texting my ex about everything. He tries to comfort me, but I'm crying and trying to find something to fight with. I also try to call my parents, but of course their phones are off. Eventually, I can't stand waiting for whatever it is to come in here, so I run upstairs and wake up my mom, who has a gun in her room, and tell her everything that I heard. This is so fucking stupid, because we searched the house and there was no trace of anything. I don't know if the original ghost invited a friend to prank me, but I don't ever want that to happen again. I have more stories, I just think these are my favorite. A bit paranormal perhaps. My grandfather got into the hospital on a Friday night. Nothing too unusual, he wasn't doing good, but he had been there before. The next day I go to work, I'm somewhat worried, but again, he'd been there before. I go on with my day. There are customers, a friend stops by and we talk, and I fill the rest of the time with homework. My grandfather is in the back of my mind, but I have other stuff going on, you know? Right around 4 o'clock, I was chatting with a coworker when I glanced at the clock and my stomach dropped. I randomly got filled with dread and profound sadness. I continue chatting, but the feeling persists. I check out at 5, the feeling of gloom persisting, and of course, my brain goes to my grandfather. I just knew. I get home and my mother tells me my grandfather passed away. I asked around what time? 4 o'clock. Serious. What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you while home alone? This will be a lengthier post, but is 100% true. I rarely ever tell this because it sounds like something someone would completely make up, but it happened, and it traumatizes me to this day. I was 7 years old, 23 years ago, lying in my bedroom on the top floor watching television. My room connects to the bathroom, which then connects to a tiny, tiny hallway, which then connects to my parents' room. I was feeling a bit sleepy, not sure of the time, but everyone else was already asleep. It was summer, and I was allowed to stay up pretty much as late as I wanted. I went to shut my television off, which was in the corner at an angle. When the screen was off, the angle allowed me to see the bathroom, hallway, and my parents' door. When I shut my television off, in the reflection, I saw a woman in all white, hanging in the hallway with her mouth wide open and her eyes staring directly into the TV. I immediately turned TV back on because I was understandably terrified and thought I was just seeing something. I watched TV for maybe only a minute before I had to know if I was making this up or if there really was a woman there. I turned the TV off and there was nothing or no one there. I was still a bit shaken, so I turned on the TV again to just watch something to calm me back down. I have no idea how much time had passed, but I finally decided I was ready to sleep, so I turned my TV off again. The woman in white was staring at me in my TV, hanging there as she was before, eyes as dark as night, her mouth wide open. I was 19 when some dude pulled into our driveway, faked some BS about being lost, and then showed me his dick. When I just blankly stared at him, he grabbed his twig and berries, waved it at me cheerily, and got into his BMW coupe and left. I didn't say a word, and may at some point have cocked my head in bemusement. I was on winter break during my freshman year of college and burrowing in the blankets on my bed because our gas heater leaked, so we had it completely shut off. This was like 2 steps above being a complete shithole apartment. Suddenly, I heard someone rattling my front door repeatedly, trying to unlock it and get in. I was scared absolutely shitless. Called the management office after they finally stopped and said, "Hi, someone was like rattling my door and trying to get in," and they told me that it was the cleaning crew trying to get into the apartment next door that had just been vacated and got the numbers mixed up. I stayed wrapped in my blankets for the rest of the day, super on edge, until my husband, then fiance, got home from work. There used to be 5 of us living in the house I live in now. We would occasionally hear what sounded like movement coming from the hallway at night or at the very end of the hall where 3 of our bedrooms were located. One roommate had the bedroom directly off the kitchen, and he says he heard something moving around in there late at night after everyone had gone to bed. Even the one super skeptical roommate would admit to hearing things now and again when he was home alone. We always made jokes about a ghost, and honestly, 3/4 of the house is off of the long windowless hallway, so it's creepy to be here alone. So one day, I'm at home alone in my bedroom, which is at the very far end of the hall. 3 roommates were at work, and 1 was out of town. I was definitely home alone. So I'm sitting in my room, probably on Reddit or something. I hear something in the hallway. I pause to listen for a second, but nothing. I go back to whatever I was doing, but I heard the noise again. I sat and listened, and sure enough, every once in a while, I'd hear something outside my door. It sounded like when someone is wearing flip-flops and walking without picking their feet up off the floor, like someone really slowly shuffling along. So I went to my window and looked outside. None of my roommates' cars were outside, and that's when I started to freak out. I went to my bedroom door and put my ear against it. The noise kept happening, and it sounded like it was in the room next to mine, but I knew for a fact that roommate wasn't home because her car wasn't here and she was working. So I start to freak out, and I'm telling myself, okay, either ghosts are definitely real or someone has broken into the home. I keep hearing the noise. I realize the hallway light is off and the switch is down the hall, so if I open my door, I'm just going to see a black hallway, and whatever is on the other side of the door. I give myself all the courage I can and finally swing my door open. I can't see anything. Again, the hallway light is off, but I hear something small run down the hallway away from me. I look to my right, and that roommate's door, the one I heard the noise in, is open, which is fine. She always leaves it open. I reach in and turn on her bedroom light. There's a bag of popcorn on the floor right by the door, with popcorn everywhere and a hole torn in the bottom of the bag. It's then that I realize we don't have a ghost and no one broke in. We have a fucking rat. So I laugh to myself and let my roomies know what's up. Sure enough, a day or two later, the roommate with the room right off the kitchen hears a noise at night and ran into the kitchen only to see the rat running down the hall. So it was official. We did have a rat. A few nights later, I was coming down the hall at night in the dark and fucking stepped on the rat. Not hard enough to kill it, but enough to feel its fur and its rubbery tail wrap around my ankle. Fucking disgusting. Eventually we caught the rat. But yeah, that first night I heard the noise outside my room, I was absolutely horrified. Turned out to just be a rat, LMAO. We think that the rat moved over here after the neighbors moved in next door to the house that had been vacant for like a year. We are in a heavily wooded area. Walked to the fridge through the doorway from my dining room to my kitchen. I opened the door, blocking my sight line to the door I just walked through. Closed the fridge door after about 10 seconds. All I saw was one of my parents' big-ass antique mahogany chairs sitting in the doorway. These things weigh like 60 pounds. Not a noise was made. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but my brain cannot logically explain it. I immediately grabbed my cat, grabbed my hunting shotgun, and went to my room. I set the alarm for motion sensors downstairs before I went to my room. I sat up in my bed, staring at the door for hours. The alarm went off one time, but none of the numbers for the motion sensors or doors were blinking. I really don't think I got any sleep that night. I'm never one to be scared of bumps in the night, but that shit was not right. I'm getting fucking chills just thinking about it. I was 18. My room used to be a patio, didn't have windows or anything. My windows were basically mesh. I could hear everything outside basically. One night, I heard heavy breathing and whispering outside of my room. I figured it was nothing, but I wanted to check. I grabbed my 1911 airgun and racked the slide back. That was enough to warrant someone or something to run off. Yeah, that shit fucking froze me. I don't know what the fuck would have happened if I didn't have my pea shooter. I live in a first floor apartment. It's climbable. My bathroom and bedroom are separated through a sliding door from the rest of the house. As I was showering, I heard a noise like a hand putting pressure on the sliding door. I knew I was going to be home alone for at least another 4 hours, so I immediately shouted, "Hey, you're home already?" with as much bass and strong voice as I could. I kill for a living kind of voice. At this point, the pressure has lifted from the door, and I hear my front door getting slammed. I walk out into the living room to find my balcony door open. It was closed. My dog woke me up quietly, but insistently at 4 a.m. one morning. I hear someone trying to enter a code into my electronic front door lock and failing. I grab my cell phone, but the charger was broken and had died. Go out to the living room quietly to grab the landline. I remember my ex-wife cut the line for some reason the day before we split up, and I hadn't been able to get someone out to repair it yet. I try to carefully peek out the curtains at the guy, and he's this triangle-shaped bodybuilder type. I realize I have no way to get help, and outside of some kitchen knives, nothing to defend myself with. As I decide to go to the kitchen to grab one of those knives, the guy outside realizes someone's moving around and starts trying to break the door down and screaming that he's going to kill me, and my big brute of a German Shepherd starts pressing himself to the back of my legs and shivering. Realizing I'm pretty much defenseless, I decide I'll bluff him, so I scream out I called the cops and that they'll be here any minute in as threatening a tone as I can. The bodybuilder outside pretty clearly doesn't believe me and continues trying to break down the door. I remember having a thought about how maybe I should have got a gun at some point for self-defense right as I start hearing a noise I'd never heard before or since. It was a terrifying sound, the sort horror movies have tried to mimic but have never gotten right. The sort of sound that when you hear it, you know it'll be the last sound you hear. The sound was my dog. Apparently, he believed my bluff and the fear and decided to fight alongside me. As I was standing there in shock, because even I was kind of scared of him at that moment, he just started bashing face first back into the door, trying to get at the bodybuilder. Somehow, the little fucker broke through the security glass with his face, before the bodybuilder and all his might could even damage the door. All of a sudden, the guy runs away as fast as he can and my dog chases after him. I'll be honest, I was too scared to run after him, but fortunately my dog came back about 10 to 15 minutes later. His face was cut up, but there was definitely blood that wasn't from him as well. Obviously, he was super proud, and even the police officers gave him treats, petted him, and called him a good boy. He definitely suffered from some trauma from it though. He insisted on going out to the yard to do a very strict patrol at 4 a.m. every night for the better part of a year afterwards. Though still, anytime there's anything that scares him, he just hides behind my legs or lays down and waits for me to deal with it. Long story short, on what happened, my ex-wife had developed a severe mental illness and was convinced I ran a death cult and was going to kill her. Somehow, she translated this into convincing some ex-Navy guy she'd met within days of us splitting up to come and kill me. He ended up in prison and she ended up in another long series of civil commitments. A funny just moment in life happened in a similar instance about a month after that, prior to everything being dealt with for that first instance. I can't know for certain, but I think her mom, and likely someone else, was involved, as I saw an old Pontiac with those lights in the rear. Anyways, I'm groggily waking up from a severe cold-induced sleep to the glass in the back door breaking and it opening. No barks this time. I just feel my dog get up from my bedside, me, and then the very quick clicking of paws as he runs full speed to the back door. I hear a male's voice shout, "Oh shit!" And then I hear grunting and running as fast as they can around the house and jumping into the car as my dog is chasing close behind. TL, DR, mentally ill ex-wife convinced the guy to try to kill me. This one time, my parents were traveling. I was home alone with my older sister and we were each on our respective bedrooms. I was playing something on my PC when I heard 3 very subtle knockings on my door. Thinking it was her, I responded with, "What is it?" But she didn't reply. So after a few minutes, I just grabbed my phone and texted her, "Hey, what is it?" She didn't understand. So I said, "You were knocking on my door just now. What was that for?" And she replied with, I left like 30 minutes ago. I'm at my boyfriend's house." I was about 10 years old, so my brother was about 14. We lived in a pretty big house with a completely useless upper floor. All that was on the upper floor was a third living room, a game room, bathroom, and a bar. Someone in the house maybe, went into the upper floor of the house once a year or every other year. Like I said, it was stupid and useless. My brother and I were home alone, as was very common for the kids that age in the 80s. The bar on the upper floor had this small door, maybe 3 feet tall, and that's how you access the entire HVAC system and attic on that side of the house. And that attic was directly over me and my brother's room. We kept hearing noises and footsteps in our respective bedrooms and started asking each other questions if they were hearing noises. He got one of my dad's golf clubs, it was a putter, I remember specifically, and we climbed that stupid tiny circular staircase, me following right behind him. We went to that stupid small door, and we both knew that once you open that door, immediately in front of you is the air handler. It was pretty massive since we lived in a very hot climate state, and the only thing you could do was get on your stomach and shimmy under it to go further into the attic. So he opens the door and just yells, "There's legs." And we fly down that circular staircase and run out of the house and to our neighbor's house, and they call the police. After they came, there was no one in the house, but they said it looked as if someone had been living in there. About 6 years later, we were robbed over the course of 3 consecutive days, with things randomly disappearing over the first 2 days, until I came home on that 3rd day and our house was wiped out. They suspected someone was living in that upper floor again, and came to know our household patterns of when we were away or home, and understood exactly where all things of value that were hidden were. To this very day, nearly 24 years after that robbery, I can't shake that creepy feeling that someone was living in that house with us, and we never knew. Since that was the HVAC space above all bedrooms in the house, at night they, he, them, she, they, an individual or a few, could have easily removed the HVAC duct from the vents to each bedroom or bathroom and watched us. The weirdest thing about the home robbery over 3 days is we were no longer living in the house during the week. We only used it on the weekends. But all of our animals still lived at the house. So, as a 16-year-old, I drove to that house every day after school to do my homework, feed the animals, and then drive to the other house we were living in. At 16, I was the one coming home every day and finding things messed up or missing, and I didn't articulate my concerns to my parents well enough. That third day, when I came home after school to feed the animals and do my homework, and I walked into a house that had been completely emptied of the valuable items, is probably the third scariest thing I've ever encountered in my life. I imagine nothing will ever bump it into fourth place. It was the most silent I've ever felt in my life. Walking into that house with shit clearly gone after I noticed shit being moved around over the previous 2 days. Oh, and we didn't live in the city. This was out in a very small town about 15 miles from a big city. Shit. Well, I just unloaded, didn't I? Exactly 3 weeks ago, I was showering at 2 a.m. in my student room. The thing is, it's a tropical architecture building in Reunion Island, so it's very open, and in my case, people can see my door and my bathroom window from a very long distance. I could even see the sea. So, one guy saw light on my window and decided to randomly come. I suddenly heard him screaming some random stuff and hitting my front door so hard I thought he was going to break it. I did nothing at first, just waiting for him to get away, but he wouldn't stop, so I stopped the water and tried to understand what he was yelling. The only thing I could understand was him screaming, asking me if I was Mava, and I have no idea where my courage came from, but I yelled him back, "No, get out," by my best aggressive tone. I learned the next morning that the guy just got out from prison and was aggressively looking for his ex-girlfriend and randomly thought it was me. Seriously, he left some creepy love letters that I wish I would have never read. Now I sometimes have trouble to sleep when I hear big noises on my walls, but fortunately I've never heard from him again. 2 guys showed up in the middle of the night pretending to be cops and tried to force their way into my house when I asked them for ID and told them I was going to call the station to confirm their identity with the desk sergeant. Turns out they'd seen me alone at a service station and they'd followed me home. My dog went crazy at them when they tried to push my door in and scared them off. I was home alone while my dad was out picking my sister up. We lived out in the country with like 3 neighbors. No one comes to the house. I heard a knock at the door, and I swear I heard the words, "Help me." I wait a minute, and then go peek out the side window and see someone walking away from the door. I full on panic and run under my bed and call my dad to come home immediately. He, of course, is like, "Nah, you're fine, but I'm almost home." I then hear noises at the back door and debate calling 911, but I do not. He finally comes home, and I see him outside talking to our neighbor. Turns out our dog had escaped and ran to their house, and they were just bringing him back. And it was my imagination that heard, "Help me." Was sitting in the living room a little after 5 p.m. when my sister was due home from work. We enter and leave our house through the back door in the kitchen, which the living room is adjacent to. I clearly heard the door open and my sister greet the cats. After a couple of minutes, I noticed I didn't see or hear her moving further into the house, so I got up, thinking she had stuff in her car and maybe needed help bringing it in. I assumed she had opened the door, put her purse and lunch bag down, then gone back to her car for whatever. She wasn't home. None of her stuff was in the house. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I sat on the back porch and waited. She was home about 10 minutes later. After I told her about it, she did some reading and told me about the Scandinavian Vardoger. To quote Wikipedia, a spirit with the subject's footsteps precedes them in a location or activity, resulting in witnesses believing they've seen or heard the actual person beside the person physically arrives. I'm not really spiritual or superstitious, but I know what I experienced, and the legend fits the bill of my experience. Heard noises in my basement on and off for a half hour, then heard something get knocked over. Since hubby wasn't home and it was late, I called police and said it may be an animal, but I'm not brave enough to look myself. They came and found nothing except some plastic bins scattered across the floor. Door to the outside was securely locked from the inside and none of the little windows disturbed. Next day we went through the basement completely. No holes where something could sneak or crawl in was found. Checked outside each window. No grass looked trampled or messed with. I never discovered what knocked over the stack of bins. What's something you saw that traumatized you for life? Found a dead cat in the backyard of the home I grew up in. The worst part about it wasn't in one piece. No, it was in several, all scattered across the yard. Its eyes were wide open, its last look of panic frozen in time for a world to see. I somehow stomached putting all of the pieces in a cardboard box. What was left of the head and neck had a collar attached to it, with the cat's name and home address. I had to show up to that address, box in hand, and inform them of their cat's fate. Fisher cats, man, they're brutal. I never thought I'd have to be in that position, and to this day, I have a hard time handling dead animals because of it. A botched medical procedure pretty much scarred me for life. When I was a kid, I had a bladder disorder where I wouldn't empty the whole way and pee would back up into my kidneys. Well, the way the urologist tested how my treatment was going was something called a cystogram. It involved getting a catheter shoved up my dick into a bladder and then having to pee on command after they inflated my bladder. I had to be fully conscious and alert for this and got it done every year from age 9 to about 14 with no sedation. One time, I had really incompetent nurses who failed to get the catheter inserted into my bladder 3 times before a urologist at the hospital had to step in and finally manage to do it. It was the perfect mix of pretty terrible pain and humiliation at a formative age to be really traumatic. I've had serious issues peeing in public or under any kind of pressure ever since then. Like, I'll get anxious and my bladder will just shut off. Needless to say, I also developed some trust issues about contact down there. Not fun. It's been 15 years and gives me pause now. I can still hear the screaming. It gave me nightmares for a good while. I was the first responder, first random person to arrive to a column of bicycle riders who were driven through by a vehicle just a moment before. There were 4 or 5. One was a tandem adult-toddler carrier. I can remember the blood. I have an image burned into my mind of a woman holding a toddler while screaming, covered in blood. I tried to help, cutting bike spokes and chains, using a spare change of clothes to dress, press, and stop the bleeding. It was just me. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 minutes before EMS arrived, but I remember it felt like it took forever. One second I'm circling the block, waiting for a friend to get off work. The next I'm taking part in a horror of someone losing their child and another losing a limb. Thinking about that makes me think of the time I was a first responder, first random guy to a semi-loaded with a class 5 that drove off the road and flipped. Me and another responder pulled the driver from the windshield. His skull had fresh dent, blood all over. He was delirious and yelling about his passenger who was still belted in and kind of upside down. Crazy scene, leaking fuel, downed power lines. I was in 1st or 2nd grade, waiting for the school bus with my brother about 6 in the morning, way out in the country. A kitten was trying to cross the road to get to us, and as the bus was slowing to a stop, it crushed its head right in front of us. The kitten was still trying to pull its head off the road while we got on the bus. We never talked about it. I saw a video on a gore website that showed a room full of people who all hung themselves at the same time, an entire family, I think. The cameraman went around the bodies and it was just so fucking eerie seeing what were recently alive human beings just slowly swaying. It was like a scene from a movie, but it was actually real. I have so much sympathy for anyone who has found someone hung. My 4th grade teacher had a reputation for making one boy in her class an unpopular scapegoat each year. Lucky me. In previous years, I'd been just another kid in the playground, but within 2 months, the other kids wouldn't play with me during recess. One day, I refused to go outside for recess. She asked why, and I foolishly told her that the other kids didn't like me. When they came back in, she marched me to the front of the class and asked me for a show of hands who didn't like me. 4th grade kids, mostly, did what 4th grade dids do. I broke down that night and told my mom what had happened and what had been going on all along. She marched into school the next day, got a meeting that included the principal, and tore the teacher a new asshole. I was still stuck in that class, but the teacher moved on to a new victim. Funny thing how self-esteem influences academic performance. My school used to give us a standard Binet IQ test every year. My score dropped 10 points from 3rd to 4th grade, then rose 20 points in 5th grade when I had a nurturing teacher. If you're still alive, fuck you, Mrs. Erickson. When I was 5, my dad was a drug addict. I know everyone says this, but I swear to you, he was a good person. He had a really bad childhood. I won't share out of respect for him, but it was some of the worst things imaginable, and he ended up on drugs. He actually became sober for years until he was peer pressured back into it. Anyway, he was high one day and driving. He ended up in a high-speed police chase that ended with the police chasing him into a brick wall, and he died. It was all over the news for days. He didn't have identification on him, but we knew it was him because the body had a tattoo that he had. Years later, I googled his name to see if anything like photos or newspaper articles about him or his childhood would come up. I ended up finding the news article about the accident, and there were lots of comments on it. There were a bunch of saying good riddance or one less druggie to deal with. People were thankful he was gone. Now, I do not condone driving under the influence at all whatsoever, but that man was a father, he was a brother, a son. He was one of the most loved people in our city, in a completely unbiased way. I'm telling you, this man was loved. His funeral had so many people, the entire funeral home was filled and tons of people were without a seat. I still get comments on how much he's missed, but I have no recollection of my father because I only knew him as the drug addict. Seeing those comments really fucked me up and made my view of him a lot more negative than it should have. No little girl deserves her dad to die over a mistake. I'm sure not everyone agrees with this, and I know he could have killed someone else while driving, but his death should not be celebrated. On my way to school in the morning, I left earlier than normally, and there was still insane traffic on the freeway. Even the carpool lane was back-to-back, bumper-to-bumper, and it was expected to take at least 3 times the normal amount of time it takes with light to moderate traffic. I kinda turned up the music and started moving toward the fast lane, and saw about a mile ahead a ton of police blocking off 4 of the lanes, including some carpool, and an ambulance showing up. I was slightly curious as to what had happened, and turned my music down as I got closer so I could see. I definitely regret looking. I saw a Jeep first, white Jeep, and an obliterated motorcycle on the side of the carpool lane. In front of the Jeep was the limp body of the rider of the motorcycle, in his Marine Corps fatigues and backpack still on. His arm was in a crazy position. There was blood, and it didn't take an expert to know that he was dead. I saw the ambulance preparing a body bag as I made my way past the incident and floored it all the way to 100 miles per hour, unable to get that image out of my mind. I can't imagine how terrible the driver of the Jeep, who I didn't see, must have felt, or the family of the man whose life tragically ended that morning. Every time I think about replaying to a message or letting my focus shift from the road to something else, I think back to that image of the man in the middle of the highway and decide that it's better to wait. I don't think I'd be able to live with myself if something like that happened as a result of my ignorance or actions. I worked at a water park as a lifeguard and was currently on break in the guard room when the emergency action plan was initiated. As one of the 3 break guards, I had the responsibility to run out with the backboard, first aid kit, and AED, or with my lifeguard tube to assist in an in-water rescue if necessary. When arriving on the scene, the primary rescuer had a 3 or 4-year-old girl out of the water and was checking her vitals. She was not breathing but had a faint pulse. I ended up running to the cashier's office and activating the evacuate pool/call 911 immediately whistle, and I was not yet aware if the girl was dead or not. In the end, she survived. But the whole situation and seeing what appeared to be a lifeless child body was a shocking experience. It's one thing that to be trained to respond, and a whole different thing to actually have to respond. I even remember seeing the panic but ready to respond look in the EMT's face when they arrived a few minutes later. Fortunately, everyone responded as they were trained to, and the situation ended happily. I give mad props to all first responders out there and respect you all so much more. Saw my dad in the pre-cremation viewing room, thawing out in a body bag with only his head visible. The bag was so thick, like underneath was his body frozen in a cylinder of fluid or something. I looked at him for almost an hour, kissed his forehead, and left. He looked so dehydrated, and I guess I was smelling formaldehyde or something. It smelled very, very, very similar to the sanitizer fluid I used at my job for the next 2.5 years before I quit. I had a few dreams of him. In one of them, he sat next to me and I cried while talking to him. He suddenly turned totally green and died, and I woke up. He was a very good Christian, the right kind, but from the dreams I've had all my life, I don't know what the hell is outside this reality. This is where having aphantasia is a boost. I've seen some grim stuff. My friend with the back of his skull blown off, body parts in the street after a pedestrian car accident, but while I can remember it happened and being pretty disturbed by it, especially the loss of my friend, I don't have any mental trauma over the sight of it now. I really don't have any emotional baggage about seeing it due to the fact that I can't picture it. Not me, but when my sister was 3 fucking years old, her and my stepfather, her biological father, were half-siblings maternally, were going up to see our great-grandmother in her apartment. What do they walk in and see? her on the floor, bleeding from the head. My sister started freaking out and crying. My stepfather had to put her in the apartment living room where she stood, and he had people come help wheel her out, her fucking bawling and petrified. She came home and ran to me terrified. Can you imagine what went through her head? For a 3-year-old toddler to see that? I felt so fucking bad as my stepfather had to go back and clean up the blood from her fall. She was 86, so it comes as no surprise she died. My sister was so traumatized that she couldn't stay the night anywhere for months. She had to come home. This all happened May 7, 2016, 2 days before my 14th birthday. Not me, but my mom and sister. This story takes place about a little over a year ago, May 13, 2018, so it's Mother's Day, and me, my 2 sisters, and my dad gave my mother her gift, which was a garden for the yard, but that's not important. So, my older sister is cool with one of my best friends. They used to be friends, but kind of fell out. My mom and friend's mom are very good friends, so they talk at our house for some time, and then decide to go out to eat at a nice Asian restaurant, P.F. Chang's. After talking for a while, they leave. Me and my dad are in the living room watching TV when he gets a call. My mom is screaming and crying, and you can hear my sister in the background doing the same thing. My dad, getting up, calms both of them down so he can understand what's happening. Eventually, they calm down enough to explain what happened. It was Sunday, and church was getting out. We're about a mile away from a small church that we don't go to, but know a lot of people who do. My mom was driving fine when a guy pulls out of the church parking lot on his motorcycle, and I guess the driver in front of them wasn't paying attention because he runs through him and his motorcycle. My mom told my sister to stay in the car, but she got out anyway. I can only imagine the looks of horror on their faces when they saw the guy. They all came back to our house, including the friends, and calmed down a while. I wasn't allowed to go into the living room for the rest of the afternoon. My mom or my sister slept for the next 2 nights. After that, when they did, they had nightmares. They were traumatized for months. This year reminded them of what happened, so it wasn't a very happy Mother's Day. My brother's girlfriend asked me to help her dispose of our 2 cats she killed. Here's the story. I was 5 years old. My brother's girlfriend handed me this big can of powdered milk, then asks me to come with her towards those really large bushes. Turns out she put our 2 cats in the can when I opened it. It smelled so bad because of the cat shit. As a kid, I felt sad and cried, realizing how cruel human beings can be when no one sees them doing cruel things. She took the can and threw it in the bushes. It really traumatized me seeing our 2 poor, lifeless cats. When I was little, I would play games on my dad's computer. I was playing one day and got bored, ended up clicking on a file on his desktop. It was full of photos of him, his face bitten, scratched to hell, and bleeding. They were evidence of my biological mother's physical abuse to put before the judge during their divorce and custody battle. I knew she hurt my brother and I, but it was deeply disturbing to realize that she hurt him too. Police here. I was 21 years old, 39 now, and had only been patrolling on my own for 2 months. It was about 9 or 10 a.m. I think. I was tired. Then I got dispatched to a woman screaming, "He's shooting the kids." I'm not sure if this is going to be real. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Also, I'm 21 and really don't know shit yet. I get there first. The woman is outside screaming. I can't tell what she's screaming. The next cop arrived on scene and we made entry through the open front door. I'm starting to think this is real. First thing I see when I go in is a gun on the floor and an adult male with a gunshot wound to the head. This is real, and now I've got to find the kids. The first boy was about 10. Gunshot wound to the head. He was dead. I moved on to clear the rest of the house. I find the second boy in the basement, about 8 years old. Gunshot wound to the head, but he's still alive. Barely. Me being 21, I have to resort back to training because I have no experience. Put pressure on the wound. That was the only thing I could think of, because they didn't teach this. So I grab a pillow and hold it against his head. It's not doing anything. It's like putting your finger on a cracked dam. It's not doing anything at all. Rescue arrives after what seemed like an eternity. The boy died in the ambulance, or at least that's what they told me. He was officially pronounced dead at the hospital. I stood in silence as the ambulance drove away for a little while, until the other officer on scene slapped me on the back and said, "Let's go," which meant I've got work to do. I'm writing the report, getting info, securing the crime scene, so I put on my coat. It was hot out, but I covered up all the blood on my uniform so the mom didn't have to see it. She was the woman screaming outside. So I went on with the investigation and did my paperwork. Afterward, I did an elementary school crossing because the crossing guard was sick. I'm getting counseling for PTSD now that it's actually available, but it's 18 years later. Back then it was just suck it up. So I did.
Do you believe in the paranormal? If you do, what's the creepiest or weirdest experience you've had with ghosts? Not me, my husband. During his junior year, his grandma died. She had some cows on a ranch a few miles down from their house, and it was still not decided what was going to come of them. So one evening, my husband and his oldest brother went out to the ranch to feed the cows. Now, it was no secret that this ranch had many spirits on it. In fact, in a back corner, there's a legitimate Indian burial ground. The only reason this ranch is still a ranch and hasn't been turned into another cookie-cutter neighborhood. Many times, my husband and his brothers, and sometimes their grandma, would camp out there and experience many supernatural things. But this specific evening was the last time my husband would go out there. After they fed the cows, he and his brother stood by their truck, parked on the side of the road, talking until it got dark. Then, for some reason, they both stopped talking. It got way too quiet. No birds, no bugs, no cars, not a sound. Husband stared off into the trees in the ranch, then he looked up. As he did, a huge dark shadow flew over the tops of the trees. Then he looked straight off again, and standing just in view were men and women all dressed in 1890s attire. Every time he blinked, more figures would appear. Husband's brother simply said, "Husband, get in the truck, now." Husband doesn't even remember getting in the truck and peeling out. He just remembers finally feeling safe and pulling off the road again to collect himself. He and his brother sat there quietly. "Husband, yeah? What did you see back there?" "Well, what did you see back there?" They went into it a little bit more. They have never spoken of it again. After giving birth to the first of my 2 spawns, had a very vivid dream about a huge black dog trying to get to my newborn. Dog was chased off by my 2 grandfathers who had passed away. One when I was 6, the other when I was 28. Still remember feeling granddad, one that passed when I was 6, patting my leg as I woke up from the dream and telling me it was going to be okay. Next day, got told off by the nurse for having visitors out of hours, as she had seen an old guy leave my room in the middle of the night. Other weird or paranormal thing, eldest spawn is terrified of dogs, just black ones. Doesn't matter about the size. She does not like black dogs. The breakfast ghost. In my house, we store our bread on a shelf high up. Almost every night for a couple of years, the bread would fly off the shelf around 2 to 3 a.m. I don't mean fell. I mean it was launched across the kitchen. Then around 5 a.m., the coffee maker would turn on, heat up, and brew. Except it would brew nothing. It was a Keurig, and no, it wasn't on a timer. I checked several times. The bread still flies off the shelf every couple of months. I just think whatever was haunting our house just really wanted some breakfast. I believe in ghosts and all that, but I'm not in the slightest bit scared of them. At my dad's house, we're pretty positive that there's a ghost, and even my dad suspects it. He's a big believer in the fact that ghosts don't exist. Anyway, we call the ghost at my dad's house Herbert. One time, my stepmom even saw him. She says that he was just standing there, not doing anything. Then, when she went to go check on my baby sister, it was gone. But we honestly like Herbert, since he hasn't pulled a paranormal activity on us. Backstory. I went to my best friend's house, who I had known for 3 years now. Behind his house is an abandoned house we went to that day where he says he saw an orb, or a type of ghost or something like that. I don't remember what they are. And when we were leaving, I heard a voice whisper something, and we ran like hell. This was a couple months ago. By the way, we just went to the door and looked inside, but I'm planning on going inside when the coronavirus goes away. Story. So it's 1 a.m., and we're both on our phones, and someone tries to open the door. We locked it, so he goes and opens it. No one is there, so he shuts the door. A couple of minutes pass, and someone yanks on the door, so he opens it. No one's there. So this happens about 3 more times. He stopped opening it. Then I say, "This keeps happening, I'm going to film." Then it happens, so I start filming. It doesn't happen again. Next morning, we are downstairs eating or something, don't remember what, and when we're done, we go upstairs. His mom comes out of the bathroom and asks, "Were you guys walking around up here?" We both say no, and she says, "Well, someone was," and I asked who it was. No one answered. Later, we looked at the door, and the frame was coming off because whoever yanked the door broke it. My dad was wearing a sweater my grandma had knit for him, same sweater she knit for my cousin's sister. That day, when I saw my dad wearing it, I for a moment imagined my cousin wearing the same sweater and looking at me with a smile. It was my imagination. A few hours later, got the news she passed away. She committed suicide. I have extremely clear memory of her smile and her standing in that sweater. That imagination. Not exceptionally too bad, but an experience for sure. My house has a barn, and within the barn is our treadmill. Every day I run a bit for my workout. One day, whilst in the middle of a run, a light bulb near the barn begins to flicker on and off. I thought the light was dying, so didn't think much of it. Then it starts to get creepy scary. The light stops flickering, and then the next one down the row begins to do so. Then the next one, and the next one. I begin to panic, believing this was Satan coming to kill me. The light flickering reaches me, and suddenly stops. I turn off the treadmill and bolt out of there. I still run, but I still am very aware of my surroundings every time I go in there. I still think that Satan was pulling some tomfuckery bullshit on me. I'm not sure if this is a ghost story, but it certainly feels paranormal. Happened about 13 years ago. I was in a public swimming pool with one other friend. I was trying to learn swimming at the time and loved jumping in the shallow pool. I just learned to float and wanted to celebrate by myself as my other friend was busy hitting on a hot girl on the other side of the pool by doing another jump in the 4-foot side. Now, the surrounding edges of the pool were made of tiles and very sharp, rather than being blunt. I jump in, but land on my feet and slip and fall back with the lower back of my head almost landing right on the sharp edge. However, before it almost hit the edge, I felt a hand in the back of my head, felt fingers in my neck, like someone was saving me from what probably would have been instant death. I jumped right back up and turned back to see the person and thank them for saving my life. There was no one. There were people around doing their regular stuff, but I couldn't find anyone in particular right around that spot. It was too short of a time from me crash landing and jumping back up and turning around for someone to just run off. To this day, I still get chills when I remember this incident and feel very thankful to whoever it was that saved my life. I haven't experienced anything that can be easily explained, but one night my brother and his friends were outside a supposedly haunted old church. They'd been hanging out outside for a while when the lights flashed on and off, and they hadn't seen anyone go in or come out. They said it was only them. When he got home, his face was white as a ghost, for lack of a better term. He still believes it was something paranormal. When I was about 18 to 20 years old, I was driving down the highway in my hometown in the middle of the day. It's a 4-lane, 2-lane each direction, decently sized highway, and usually pretty busy, especially during the day, which is when this occurred. So, I was in the fast lane about to pass a car in the slow lane. It was an early 2000s Jeep, and although there were other cars around then, weren't any right close to me or for a bit behind and in front. Well, as you do when you pass a car, sometimes you look at the driver of the vehicle. When I looked over at him, he turns his head to look at me, and his jaw was moving violently up and down and back and forth and stretching in all directions so fast it was blurry. It was almost like the mouth on the screen mask, or when in movies when a character is able to see a demon possessing someone that others can't see or something. So, I looked away, and when I looked back again, he was just normal and smiling at me, with this pleased look on his face. So messed up. When I was little, I had sleep paralysis. There was a tall man in a dark suit with huge red eyes, long arms, and a huge smile, a top hat, and he was holding something, not sure what. He had long, bony fingers, and when he was talked then the ceiling, so he was slouching. My ceiling is 6 feet tall at my mom's house. I was so scared I pissed the bed, and he slowly walked up, pointed at my face, and said, "I'm always here. Never forget that. You're being watched always, even when you think you're alone. I'm here." I recently had the same dream, sleep paralysis, except he just stared at me. That was 2 weeks ago. I believe him, and when I was little, I named him Tom. Don't know why, but I still call him Tom when I talk about him. Yes, and it might start kinda creepy, but my tired at that time response might ruin it, so sorry in advance. So I was still living with my parents at the time, entire basement all to myself. It was still being renovated when the previous owner of the place passed away. Later found out it was suicide by hanging. There were always little oddities that happened here and there, but nothing major for the first few months. Now, I've dealt with supernatural presences before, mostly ghosts, so it takes a bit to really freak me out. There were a few I debated on putting here instead, but was going for a funny ending to help give others courage if the other stories were too creepy. Steadily, This ghost became increasingly annoyed, angry, I don't know what, but they weren't happy. I'd wake up from a dead sleep with the feeling that someone was standing over me, even a few times feeling like something was on my legs, kind of like how a dog does sometimes, but much bigger and heavier. Oftentimes my hallway light would turn off and on at random even after 2 rewirings, but the things that really did it for me was tripping over nothing at all going down the stairs. Caught myself mercifully, felt like when a friend tries to trip you with their leg. After that, I immediately went to go play Monster Hunter on my Wii to calm down. I was furious rather than scared, but eventually I wanted a drink and made my way down to my room to get one. As soon as the door leading down to the basement opened, the light started flickering sporadically, like someone was flicking the switch on and off again on rapid fire. In my frustration, due to being tired, the previous incident, and my need for caffeine, I just blurted out, "Stop that, you dumb fuck. I just want a Dr. Pepper, you piece of shit." Immediately it stopped. I went down and got my drink and had a few instances like that. My sister got harassed on occasion, but never when I was around. Hope this helps make someone laugh and have the courage to continue scrolling. The other stories are probably creepy. Hope so, given the title. Absolutely believe in them. I've seen ghosts many times, but my very first time was that most impactful to me. My dad died of colon cancer when he was 44. He has hung on for longer than the doctors predicted and was really suffering the day he died. He has torn out of bed when my older brother was supposed to be caring for him and fallen and was screaming for help, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him back into bed. I was 12. After what seemed like hours of hearing my dad cry for help, my mom and uncle showed up and got my dad up and called an ambulance to take him in and make sure he wasn't injured, and he was taken to my grandma's. 4 hours, my mom came into my grandma's house and told us that my dad had passed on. Needless to say, I was devastated. That night, we all slept in my mother's room because we didn't want to be alone. I was wide awake because of everything when I heard my dad's distinctive way a thing. He was a lifelong heavy smoker. I looked up and there was my dad, clear as day, and just looking at me. I was so shocked I couldn't form words, much less make a noise. He looked at me with a sad look in his face, turned and walked away. I was just in such a state of shock about what I saw that I laid back down. I truly regret not talking to him and will until I see him again. Mine is pretty current, still going on. I work at a supermarket in the style department. We had renovations about 3 months ago, in which I worked the night shift. When I got back to day shift, I went back to the style team. One of our main jobs in style is to check the dressing rooms every hour in case people steal or whatever. We haven't had to do it as much because of quarantine, dressing rooms are closed, but people will sneak in from time to time to try stuff on. Found a few people and had to kick them out. For the most part, the area is quiet other than music that plays over loudspeakers. While sorting through clothes that have been returned and quarantined for 3 days, I heard some hangers rattling behind me in the dressing room. I thought it was odd because I'm oblivious, but not so oblivious. I miss a whole fucking person walking past me. I assume I'm realistically just an idiot and go back to check on all the rooms. No one is in there. No hangers, no clothes, nothing. Then a few days after this, I'm sorting through the clothes again, and I hear a loud dragging sound behind me. I look to my friend, who was already looking at me. I openly say, "What the fuck was that?" She shrugged, so I go in and see what's up. No way 2 of us missed the whole fucking person walking in. I decide to move all of the stools to the corners of the room so I could see if I could figure out which room was having this activity. As soon as I dragged one of the stools into place, I realized that there was definitely the noise I heard. I walk out and explain that to my friend, who is spooked, but we've unsurprisingly seen scarier working in retail. People have been dropping pants in front of us to try clothes on and also will shit in the store under where leave it. Like I said, ghosts aren't the scariest thing we've dealt with. I later jokingly told my boss, "Haha, I think the dressing room is haunted." And she looked at me and said, "You heard the hangers too?" I got chills, but we both laughed, saying that it's probably a past employee who can never let go. I heard people whispering and such the other day, but honestly, I don't know that one. I'm a little skeptical on. Either way, freaky working there when I have to. I've never really seen a ghost, but my aunt killed herself in 2015, and I took it fairly hard as she was my favorite aunt. About 2 months after her death, I had a dream about her. In the dream, we were painting the walls with her, and I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and she followed me. In the dream, I knew she was dead, but didn't think much of it. I asked her if she was happy, and she said yes. I asked if she missed us, and she said yes. Then, taking advantage of this opportunity, I asked her if she could tell me what heaven was like. She laughed and said no. She then gave me a hug, and everything turned yellow, like looking at the sun with your eyes closed, while she was hugging me. It felt like we started floating. I knew that dream was meant to help me realize she was okay, and she's in a better place. It was her saying goodbye.
What is something you've experienced that you can't explain that's unnatural, supernatural, or paranormal? I see glimpses of the future in my dreams or daydreaming, like really fast events, but I can see them clearly. At first I thought it was deja vu, then I started noting them and they actually happen in the future. Something I can't understand, which I'm sure happens with everyone else, so I'm not special, but when I would be walking somewhere and just start imagining situations in my head, I come back to reality to realize that I've basically gone on autopilot toward my destination and I've somehow not bumped into something whilst I was, I guess, subconsciously absent. Any explanation to why this is a thing would be appreciated, although I just assume it's similar to sleepwalking. When I was about 13 or 14, can't quite remember, I was at my village hanging out with my two friends. This guy that the girls knew comes around with his new scooter and the girls start asking him to take them for a ride around the schoolyard. I didn't really like him, but I didn't want to seem like a loser, so I told him, okay, I'll go first, just to get it over with. And he said, no, you'll go last. So he takes the girls for a spin around the schoolyard twice, one at a time, and then it was my turn. When we ran around the first time, and we were about to do another round, he just drove off from a side road. I started asking, where are you going? And he said, I'll just take you for a longer ride. I asked him to stop right there or I'll yell, and he stopped and parked his scooter on the stand. Very important, a small chapel was nearby. As soon as I was off the scooter, I start walking back and he grabbed me, held me so tight that I couldn't move my hands and started kissing my neck. I couldn't push him away and I started thinking, please God, make him stop and I'll start believing in God again. I was scared shitless, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his new scooter fell. There was no one nearby to push it, there was no breeze to move it, and it was on the stand secured, so there was no way it could have just fallen like that. At this moment, he let go of me to go check it, and I run back. He came next to me with the scooter and told me that he would drive me back, and I said, no thank you, I can walk. I could never make sense of how it fell, especially right after I thought what I thought. I still get panic attacks when someone hugs me too tightly or if I'm under the covers and someone puts the slightest pressure on any body parts. I get a sense of impending doom. I always get terrible feelings in the pit of my stomach before something bad happens. I don't know what will happen or when. All I know is something will happen, and I'm almost always right. I always get nervous when I get that feeling. When I was around 5 or 6, I walked into my living room at around 3 a.m. to go watch some cartoons. Right next to the TV was the heater, and on the heater there was an outline of a mother and a child. I turned around to look out the window to see what was causing the shadow and only saw the streetlight. I quickly ran to tell my mom, and when we came back, it was gone. Me and my buddy were high and ordered pizza from a place, but this idiot put in the wrong number, which happened to be another pizza place. This place does not deliver, but they delivered. No one believes us, but it really happened. I know it's not a cool story, but to this day I can't figure out how this happened. I saw ghosts a lot when I was young. When my grandfather passed away, I saw his shadow walking up the stairs one time like he always did when he was still alive. I saw a woman in white when I visited one of my relatives. I was at the front of the house and I saw her standing sideways at the back of the house. She looked exactly like you imagine a ghost would look like just white dress, long and dark hair. For some reason, I ran toward her and yelled, "Mom, LOL." When I told my relatives, they said that everyone also saw her and she was in the family before I was born. I also heard that my house is haunted, but I haven't seen much when I got older. When I was at my grandma's house as a kid, maybe around 8 to 10, I've seen a glowing figure dashing down the stairs. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The kitchen door was closed, but it had a glass panel, so I was able to see the staircase from where I was sitting. Suddenly, something very bright dashed down the stairs. I was able to make out a human figure, head, shoulders, arms, legs, but it glowed. It looked like it was made of light. It was very fast, and from my angle, it looked like it came running down the stairs from the second floor, passing the hallway and right out of the front door. But I didn't hear the front door opening or closing. I was shocked, and I remember trying to explain what I've just seen, but no one really believed me. I've never talked about it again. I'm 29 now, still thinking about it. There was no other source of light there except for the lamp in the kitchen where I was sitting. The hallway was dark, and since the house was located a good bit away from the street, there's no way it could have been the lights of a car, and it definitely looked like a human figure. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't the only strange thing that happened there. Not scary, but I still think about it 10 years later because I just can't explain it. I was having a sleepover with my best friend and we were sharing a bed. I dreamt I was on a big wooden ship exploring all the different cabins. I knew we were at sea because of the sound of the waves and the heavy rocking. I opened one door to a kitchen galley where my best friend was dashing around, opening up all the cupboards and lifting up pots and pans, very distracted looking for something. I tried to get her to come explore with me, but she said she couldn't. She needed to do something, so on I went. When we woke up, she said, "You were in my dream. I had to take care of someone's baby, but I lost it. While I was looking for it, you showed up and tried to get me to leave to go hang out." I asked her where we had been. A big round room with kitchen things in it, but the weather outside was making the whole room rock and things fall down. Actually, it was kind of like the below decks of a boat. I do sleep talk. Maybe we were both sleep talking and influenced each other's dreams that way. It would explain the shared conversation, but not really the setting of a rocking ship. So it was 3 to 4 a.m., 2020, and I was still awake watching YouTube videos on my phone. I had to use the bathroom, so I got up and went to the bathroom, and I was sitting on the floor watching TikToks when I started hearing the sound of an elevator ding 6 or 7 times, and the door wasn't locked, but it was completely shut, and so I was moving towards the door because I got a little scared, and the door opened and pushed me out of the way. I was the only child left at home, and my parents were asleep. I checked before I went to the bathroom, and it happened again the next morning around 4 or 5 a.m. It was like stepping onto Leatherface's killing grounds. A lot of Indiana has little private woods, and by God, they can be creepy. One of them was this place in some backwoods from my uncle's property. We'd get a troop of us cousins, about 20 of us, to take the half-mile trek through the woods to the abandoned property back there. Cross the creek and you're in some hellhole halfway junkyard. In backwoods Indiana, you can find a lot of personal junkyard type properties, but this was something different. This was an antiquated junkyard. Didn't seem anything past the 1960s was there. There were 3 old rusted junker vehicles from the 1950s and 40s. There was just so much junk lying around everywhere, we'd look around for cool shit. We found an old briefcase and decided to open it. I gave my knife to a cousin to open it. When we opened it, the only riches we received was a partial set of human teeth. I didn't appreciate the gravity of the situation at the time. It was something different. I had an army of cousins though. We'd been able to have some crazies. After about 45 minutes or so there, we were all rushed out of there by a really ominous presence. With no fence between us, a jet black stallion tried to corner us. This beast had hate in its reddish eyes, and it charged us back across the creek. It was an absolutely beautiful horse though, even though it was a demon. 13 years ago, my parents went on vacation and I was alone in our house. I invited a friend over because we wanted to chill and drink some beers. We went down to the cellar to grab some, and by the time we wanted to go upstairs, we saw that the door was shut. We tried to open it, but it was locked. The thing is, it's only lockable if you're inside my house, and the door cannot be unlocked from inside the cellar. We immediately thought that there is an intruder in my home. We climbed out a small window and went inside the first floor through my main entrance. We armed ourselves with knives from the kitchen and proceeded to search the whole house for signs of an intruder or burglary, but never found any. To this day, we don't know who or how we got trapped. I catch my phone just as it's about to die. I stand up to check my food just as the microwave is about to beep. I learn about something, and the next day I see a bunch of stuff about it. For example, I learned about an artist from my art teacher, and today I saw a post about one of her murals. So I share a room with my brother, and I just don't like sleeping in the room, so I sleep in my living room on the couch. Anyways, There was a frame hanging on the wall, and I was laying on the couch on my phone while suddenly it starts lightly shaking, like as if someone was parked in the front yard with a car running. I look at it, and I'm confused. Keep in mind, none of the other ones were shaking, so I look outside and no one is out there. I go to the side of the house on the wall where it's hanging and look at the AC fan thingy to see if it's on, but that's not either. It was super late, and nothing was, nor was anyone around. So I walk back inside and lightly touch the frame, and it stopped shaking, so I just go to bed. A few days later, it happens again, but this time it's a different frame. I touch it lightly and it stops. It hasn't happened again. Anyone got any explanations? My mom tells me this story. It was her and her uncle and a few other family members didn't believe in paranormal shit or any of that at all, so they got a Ouija board and used it. It was working, but they still didn't believe it, so they proceeded to throw it in a barrel that they were burning stuff in, and I recall my mother telling me it made the most ear-piercing, deafening scream they had ever heard in their life. My mom tells me this story. Her and my dad were in Mexico at a hotel, and they had just checked in, a decent-looking place, and my mom was in the bathroom doing her makeup and hair. My dad went in the bathroom, and they were just talking, and when they came out, it was only a few minutes. It was as if someone came in and pushed everything off the desks and nightstands onto the floor, and everything had been tore up. They never had an explanation. One night, when going to get snacks one night at my local gas station, it's a 5-minute walk, so not too bad, looked at the sky. Black and cloudy, not a star in the sky or a moon to be seen. I grabbed a sandwich and started to walk back home. Up just over the horizon is the moon, full and blood red. There were 3 electronic-looking red lights hanging above the complex. I took a bewildered snap on my phone, freaking out how I'm seeing a blood-red full moon at 1 a.m. I post the Snapchat, look up at 1:01 a.m. to see nothing. There's no moon. I make my way home, telling myself it was a cloud. The next night I do the same thing. The moon is now full and visible, but the red lights over the complex were nowhere to be seen, even though I had them on video. Back in 2007, when I was 11, I went camping with my dad. At night, my dad and I were sitting around the campfire when all of a sudden we started hearing this loud, strange sound that almost sounded like a horn coming from somewhere. At first, we thought it was a jet flying by, but we didn't see any lights in the sky, and it was constant, whereas a jet you can hear get closer and fade away as it goes further from you. We couldn't tell if it was coming from the sky or the mountains nearby at this point. That sound just kept going on, and it was freaking me the hell out, and I wanted to just go home at that point. The sound stopped right before we went to bed. Then, at around 3 a.m., that sound came back, and it woke me up. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I got my PSP out, my headphones, and played that until the sun came up. We didn't hear that sound again after that night, and throughout the years camping at that same campground, we've never heard it again. The funny thing is that I remember sometime in 2010 to 2012, people all over the world were hearing a loud horn sound coming from the sky, and it sounds eerily similar to what I heard that night at the campsite. It's strange though, because people didn't start hearing that until years later after I did. First, my mom. I think I actually posted about this a while ago, but it didn't get much attention. It probably isn't very interesting, lol. One day we were shopping, and she told me about a dream she had about the pastor at our church. We don't attend church often anymore, but we used to go very frequently. The community was loving and judgment-free. They did not question anyone no matter how often they showed up or whether they had been to the church before. The pastor preached straight from the Bible and gave us the cold, hard facts. No embellishment, no half-truths, lies, or deviation from the Bible itself. He was a great, generous, and selfless man. The Bible was his whole world. I'm rambling. LOL. Anyway, she dreamed that he was sitting in his living room with a birthday cake on his lap. Everyone he knew and loved was there celebrating his birthday. She told me he was incredibly happy, just completely filled with joy, and that the whole dream had been extremely pleasant. Fast forward a couple days later, and we find out that the pastor had died the day after she told me this. It's not the first time she's had dreams about male acquaintances that came true, but it is the most significant that I'm aware of. Second, myself. Sometimes I have some very realistic dreams that seem to come true the next day. I say seem to, because very mundane things happen in these dreams that can be explained away as being my normal routine or being something I would do because I had the dream. I'll dream that I took a shower or bought bananas, normal things, but very realistic. Like I'd actually wake up and be like, where the fuck are my bananas I just bought? Sometimes though, things happen in these dreams that I would not expect, and they also seem to come true. I dreamt that a coworker told me she was pregnant, and in real life, this same coworker told me she was the next day. She had never given me any reason to expect this kind of news, and it came as a complete surprise, since I didn't sit near her at work or even talk to her on a daily basis. Another small thing that happens often, I believe humans who are close to one another are a little psychic towards each other too, crazy as that sounds. When my mom or sister would go to the store, I would think about something very specific that I wanted, but forgot to tell them, and lo and behold, they would return with exactly what I wanted. And I don't always ask for the same things. Some of the stuff I've wanted has been pretty far out there, vice versa, same thing. I'd be in the store and look at something and think, my sister would like this, and I'd get it. I actually thought this was normal, and maybe it is, I don't know. All I know is, I moved in with my best friend 8 months ago, and they never seemed to be on the same wavelength when going to the store. They know I like Diet Coke, but if I don't tell them I want it, they won't think to get it. I went upstairs to fetch a charger for my vape, and when I came down, the vape had disappeared. This was 2 years ago, never saw it again. I have no idea exactly where I left it, but it's a small room with not much furniture. Also, I have a tiny key to a padlock on my shed. About a month ago, I lost it and started using the spare. Then, about a week ago, I saw it on the cabinet near the door, exactly where I always put it. I searched for both items extensively. I don't know if it was real or if my friend was just making it up, but he would get haunted and tormented by a 10-foot tall decaying wolf man that would appear at night, and when he was walking around his neighborhood, it would attack him and scratches would appear on his back for a day, and next there would be no sign of him. Years before all of it, he told me about a dream he had of it, but he didn't think much of it until it started appearing out of dreams. I'm not sure what happened, but I haven't heard much about it now. When I was 9, my cousin and I were in the backyard playing in the snow at Christmas. It was on a very large hill close to twilight, and we saw a rabbit, which was no big deal in a rural area. When we got closer, we noticed it was jet black and missing its eyes. It wasn't bleeding or anything, and we didn't look injured, so the missing eyes were kind of weird. After a while of trying to figure out what it was, it turned to us and ran up to us before disappearing. We were so freaked out, we ran back to the house and didn't go outside for the rest of the weekend without my older brother or cousin.